Test, test, test. 1, 2.
Oh, goodbye, movie.
And we are live. Welcome everybody to today's podcast. This is actually our official third podcast of the year. Kind of late with them, but here we are. Today's podcast is a bit different. Well, it's more than a lot, more than a bit. It's a lot different than our normal podcasts. Today we have storytelling basically of paranormal things like that. Stuff that's not normal. We are not in an actual podcast room currently. We are actually within our TV room. And we actually have quite a few people here with us today. We have our normal two hosts, Benjamin Snowheart and Shy Blair. But we have two people who are somewhat new. We do have a welcome back guest, Mr. Dr. Troy himself,
Hello, everybody. Good to be here.
who is actually a doctor once again. So,
I am officially practicing medicine, indeed.
yes. And we have a twin.
How's it going, everybody? Great to be here.
And remember, guys, for tuning in, you remember to use hashtag podcast. That's how you're going to be getting in contact with us today. And the first conversation we're actually going to be speaking about is skinwalkers. We're going to kind of go around the room, talk about people's thoughts, ideas on them, before playing a video for all of you guys to actually listen to. And let us know, like, what do you think? Me particular, my thing about skinwalkers, when I first heard about them, I thought just like a super like anorexic person is like when I first was hearing about them, and just thinking that
Nice.
they were like on crack or something. Like
Yeah, well,
super drugged up.
it's not far off, but
I don't know. When I think of Skinwalker, I think of, I mean, it's depending on what you believe in, it's kind of dangerous to say this, but the Wendigo,
Oh, the Wendigo.
definitely
Mm-hmm.
something that still looks humanoid. Yeah, I guess the result of somebody that commits an act of cannibalism, right? Eat another person, and you turn into this creature. That's kind of the Skinwalker-esque. That's what my mind goes to.
I think the term really actually goes all the way back to Navajo, though.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yep.
are witches that possessed.
Yeah,
Right.
there's a belief from the top for the natives, the fact that these witches, the reason why they're called skinwalkers is because they don't just appear in that super anorexic form. They have the ability to take the skin of predators and wear them to, scare off people who are unwanted.
Exactly, and I don't know about everybody else. I mean, that's pretty top-notch creepy right there.
Yeah, that's definitely very interesting. I've had a few people. I had an ex friend of mine. Don't know how real this is, but they were a triathlon runner, and those big long city runs that people would do.
Yeah.
Well, they'd be out in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, having these like for like really like country cities, country towns, and everything. And they swear one night when training they started getting chased by one, or it was an anorexic crackhead, but somebody who looks like that
oh god,
started chasing them.
To be honest, I don't know what I would do in that situation.
I'd
Maybe a
piss
priest.
myself.
I need a priest.
I need a priest. I
Give me some
need
sage.
a grappling gun. I need like the not a harpoon gun, but the net gun. I need a net gun.
I mean,
Or a
there are
crossbow
truly
with an
some
aim dot sight.
terrifying things you can see on the internet, and the question is always, are they authentic or not?
Yeah,
Very true.
I've seen
That's
some
hard to
pictures
confirm.
with some like trap cameras for hunters. And
Yeah.
I've seen some shit with those. I'm like, some of these things look so wicked personally when you find them on yourselves and you look at them. Like they are definitely humanoid, but it's like their skin's unpenetrable almost because there's so many stories of like people shooting like an entire clip, entire like mag into these things, and it does nothing.
Well,
Although
go ahead, Toon. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, although I mean, creatures like that always tend to have a weakness using the right metal. I mean,
Sounds like
have
vampires.
we? Well, yeah, definitely comparison to that, but I mean, not that's not the only thing either. I'm just wondering if we've tried all of the options.
It's true. I mean,
Something like what nickel, copper, or like some
Yeah,
of
like
iron,
let's,
maybe like some
spread it
really
out a little bit. Maybe titanium even.
when it comes
okay.
to
Oh wait, what about
mythological
more of the
stories,
natural or sorry to interrupt you, Troy.
no,
But I'm thinking like some
please,
of the really old ores, back when like the Navajo and everything was around, like some of that natural stuff.
Right. Some
old
kind of
pure
ore that's more
iron
like,
or meteorite
yeah,
ingots with precious metals that are not maybe uh, as common on Earth.
Yeah, something that's a lot harder to find maybe. I
or
think
maybe
that'd be like
obsidian.
really oh shit, obsidian. I haven't actually thought about that.
Kind of the overall thing that I'd like people to consider as we talk about the supernatural is if something is mythological, if something has been made into myth, at one point it is possible that it was an actuality. Like there are things that have gone into myth that could have been actual history at one point that was just lost into oral tradition. We haven't been able to write that long. You know what I mean?
I was gonna say all folk tales, all stories have some form of truth in them.
Right, exactly.
I mean, that's
Exactly that.
exactly what a folk tale is. It's real life that has gotten distorted a little bit, made into a creepy kid's tale and or adult tale, depending on what you're talking about. Clearly, Skinwalker's the subject would be more of an adult folk tale.
Yeah, like that. I know we're just kind of running off the topic, but we'll get right back to the Skinwalker thing. But it reminds me of like the original story of like how there was the creepy pasta original story of like how Pokemon was made. Like some demented kid was tormenting all these animals.
I mean, that doesn't surprise me, to be honest.
No, that sounds entirely legitimate considering the context of
Yeah,
Pokemon.
yeah, like that's how like the original like 12, like the most famous 12 was like kind of made. They are saying it's like based off of this kid just like tormenting animals, like setting a lizard on fire, putting a rat through electricity, implanting plants into the back of a toad's back.
I have to wonder if the kid was high. Let's light a lizard on fire and call it Charizard.
Or I don't know, something's going through it, but think of it like if that was real though, you know.
For yeah,
I think it'd be really kind of cool. But getting back to the Skinwalker thing, there's an actual video I have pulled up. That's why I'm saying today's gonna be a little bit of difference. There's a lot of different stories I have for today. One of them deals with NASA, one of them deals with soldiers. I can't say the word. People who are in armed forces being scared of things. That's what I think's really cool, Troy. I think you're gonna like that one.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
of you guys being scared of things. But let me go ahead and start this video, and we'll get into it.
Some call this location the most paranormal location on the planet. Others call this whole thing just a big hoax. But what is undeniably true, and frankly what makes this case so much more interesting, is that unlike the vast majority of paranormal stories and claims, this case was put to an enormous amount of scientific scrutiny. In fact, there was a decade-long study done on this case where PhDs and scientists converged on this one location and basically around the clock studied, all these claims of the paranormal that was happening in the area. And after a decade of research, the findings are pretty mind-blowing. And the case that I'm referring to is none other than the very famous Skinwalker Ranch. So the too long didn't read version of this story is you have a family that purchases a ranch out in Utah, and as soon as they move in, they start noticing some pretty bizarre things around their property. Everything from, some of their livestock going missing or being harmed. They have strange sightings in the woods of creatures and lights in the sky. They eventually report it to the news, and that news story gets picked up by a couple of other outlets, and a billionaire who is obsessed with researching the paranormal sees this story. He buys the property and installs an entire team of scientists and researchers to basically try to figure out what was happening at this ranch. And they spend 10 years studying this ranch. The outcome is, well, turns out some strange things really were happening there. Before we get started, if this type of content appeals to you, the kind of strange, dark, mysterious content delivered in a story format, well, if that appeals to you, that's what my channel's all about. And I post 3 to 4 times a week. So if you would, if that appeals to you, please gently ransack the like button and then turn on all notifications so you can get all of my content every time I upload every week. All right, on with the story. In the northeastern corner of Utah lies a 500-acre plot of land, it's all desert, where a ranch sits, and that is Skinwalker Ranch. It was built in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was actually built on a piece of land that had apparently been cursed. Prior to its construction, the Navajo tribe had a feud with the Utes Native American tribe. The Utes were selling off other Native Americans that they would capture. They would sell them into slavery to the United States. And so the Navajo, who had previously lived in the area where this ranch actually was built, they were forced off their land as the Utes came in and were rounding them up and selling them into slavery. And before the Navajo left that area, they cursed the land with what's called the Skinwalker Curse. The idea was they were going to torment the Utes tribe for the hardships they had inflicted on the Navajo. The Skinwalker Curse, legend has it, is this curse where these witches descend on the area and take the form or wear the skin of various predatory animals in the area, namely large wolves and foxes. They inhabit those bodies and terrorize anybody in the cursed land. At some point, this ranch is actually built on the land that had apparently been cursed. It wasn't until many years later when owners of that ranch started seeing predatory animals doing some very strange things in and around their property that they did some research on the area, learned about this curse, and then before long, the nickname had stuck. In 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman purchased Skinwalker Ranch. It had actually been abandoned by the previous owners for the last few years, so when they purchased it, they got it for way below market price. So they are just so excited to be moving in. They breed cattle, and so they had 500 acres to let their cattle free roam. It was like the dream purchase for this family. And so when they finally do move in, like the day they move in, they don't really care that the grass is overgrown. It looks like things are kind of in disrepair. And in fact, when they go into the homestead, like the actual house on the property, they were so excited about everything that they kind of overlooked some of the strange things that they immediately noticed about the property. They go inside and every window has a deadbolt on it. The inside and outside of every door in the house, not just the doors leading outside, doors leading between rooms had locks, the front and back side. They noticed these big pikes that were driven into the ground at the front door and back door of the property with massive chains stringing off of them, which looked like pretty powerful guard dogs had been there. They're thinking to themselves, well, this is a huge piece of property. Perhaps the previous owners are a little bit paranoid because they're kind of isolated. And so they didn't really raise a red flag when, to be honest, had I moved into a property where every single door and window had multiple locks on it, they had these big guard dogs, I'd probably ask a couple questions, but you know what, Terry and Gwen, they're just so excited about this purchase that, again, they kind of just overlook it. So on the day that they are moving in, Terry and Gwen have some family members over to help them offload trucks and move stuff into the homestead. And it's during this process, as they're moving things out of the truck into the house. And again, you got to remember that the house is situated like right in the middle of the property, and you can see in every direction basically unobstructed because it's basically open desert, with the exception of a couple areas that are, basically forests. And as they're offloading some of the stuff into the house, Terry looks out at one of these tree lines and he notices this huge wolf, or what looks like a wolf, pretty well off in the distance, kind of meandering its way over towards them. But it's far enough off that this is not enough to be totally worried about it. After all, Terry was a rancher and his family were fairly rugged. They carried weapons and they were used to, protecting their livestock from predators. So this was not a, oh my goodness, I can't believe a wolf is near us. It was more like, okay, let's make a note that there's a wolf walking towards us. And so Terry does. He tells his family, "Hey guys, just so you know, there's a wolf coming towards us right now." And the whole family is now standing near the truck, and they're watching this wolf. And Terry recalled, as he's staring out watching this wolf, it's kind of almost walking in like a snake, like a serpentine path towards them from hundreds of yards out. It's still quite a ways out. Terry notices that there was a fence that was out where this wolf is. And the fence was pretty big, and the spaces between posts were about 6 feet. When he had a good look at the wolf next to the fence, he could tell that the wolf was at least 6 feet long. And he was thinking, are my eyes playing a trick on me? Like, that's an enormous wolf. That's the biggest wolf I've ever seen. But the wolf wasn't acting angry or aggressive. It was just kind of skulking its way towards him, very nonchalant, broad daylight. And at some point, Terry and the family, they're standing behind the truck, and Terry said that they all had this feeling that the wolf was not going to harm them. And the wolf got about 100 yards away, and Terry and his family are transfixed. And he even said he didn't understand why they weren't scared or why they weren't, running away or shooting at it or something, but they didn't. All of them are just standing there watching this wolf that's massive. And the wolf is wagging its tail and acting like a domesticated dog. The wolf comes over and goes up near Terry's father, who was there helping unload some of the gear they had. And Terry's father just kind of reflexively reaches out to start petting this. He's petting like up at his head level, this massive wolf. And the wolf just acts like a domesticated dog and kind of rubs against his hand and then starts walking away from them, just wagging its tail and not doing anything, not causing them any harm, not snarling, not growling, nothing. But just as nonchalantly as it walked over to them, it walks over to where they had a pen with a couple of cows and calves inside of this pen. And one of the calves had its head through the post that was keeping them in this cage, just kind of watching this wolf. And the wolf notices it and in an instant jumps over to this calf and immediately has the whole head of the calf in its jaws, just trying to rip it out of the cage. But it can't get it to squeeze through the cage. And so all of a sudden, Terry and his family are broken out of this weird trance. And Terry starts firing shots at the wolf. It strikes the wolf and has no impact. They run over, they start hitting it with the back end of an axe. They're trying to get this thing off of the calf because their livestock, that was their livelihood. And these are rugged people, and so they're trying to fight to save their property, to save their cows. And the wolf is just totally unaffected. It's not trying to attack Terry or his son that are trying to get rid of it. The wolf is just trying to attack the cow, but it won't let go. And finally, it just kind of gives up on the calf, starts kind of retreating. Terry ends up getting his rifle, a high-powered rifle, and takes a shot at the wolf one more time. But again, it just has no impact on the wolf. And the wolf just, at some point, just is, I guess, bored, turns around and kind of trots off into the woods. After they kind of were brought out of that initial trance, that they remembered this horrible smell, this like foul, almost chemical smell that just permeated the whole area after the wolf was there. Terry and his son, they decided to go track this wolf because now there's this massive predator that's going to make owning cattle extremely difficult, and so they would have to go deal with this predator. And so instead of retreating into the house, they grab their weapons and they track the wolf that's now jogged off into the forest. And they make it to an area in the forest where the ground is very muddy and sodden. And Terry could easily make out these footprints that just suddenly stop. And they just couldn't make sense of it. And so they went back to the house and they told their family, like, we tracked it into the woods. There's no blood trail. There's nothing. It just walked in and vanished. So this is day one of being at this ranch. And they're all on edge now. The whole family is on edge. They really don't know what to make of that wolf. The sheer size of it, the fact that it was totally unaffected by being shot multiple times. There's real concern over their own livelihood because they keep cattle and they're only going to have more that are going to be out in these pens. And if there are wolves that are 3 times the size of a normal wolf that are walking around killing cattle, that's a big problem if you own cattle. And so they're on edge and they're all in a way trying almost not to talk about how crazy and how bizarre that encounter with the wolf was. They're just like, they're treating it like it's just a normal predator problem. Like, man, we gotta get those wolves, we gotta protect our cattle. But in the back of everybody's minds, they're like, something very strange is happening here. Gwen, she was having some other very strange things that were happening to her that she was not tying to the wolf thing. She was just noticing a couple of distinct things that were happening to her that made her think that she actually had a very real, like, medical problem, that she had, like, true memory issues. Because 2 things happened. One, in that first week, she had gone to the grocery store, and when she came back, she put the groceries away, and then she left to go to the other room, and when she came back, all the groceries were now back in the bags. And so for like 20 minutes, she's just sitting there like dumbfounded with, did I put the groceries away? Same day, she goes to take a shower, and she hangs her towel in the bathroom like anyone would, and she takes a shower, and then when she gets out, the towel's missing. And she's like, huh. She gets another towel, and she towels off, and then she finds the towel hanging up in a closet on the other side of the house. And so between the groceries and the towel, she's like, is there something wrong with me? Am I like having a stroke? Am I having a medical issue here that I'm like literally losing my mind? And it wasn't until Terry actually had a similar experience that she started to wonder if this had to do with maybe that strangeness with the wolf, that maybe there's just something odd happening about this property. And it was Terry, in that first week, he had been digging holes for a new fence. And he had this big fence digging tool. It was about 70 pounds that he was using to dig the holes for the fence. And so he had taken a break after making a bunch of posts for this fence. He took a break, left his fence digging tool, at the last place he had dug a post, and he went in to grab a bite to eat, came back out, and his fence digger is missing. And initially, he just goes into the house, and he's like, hey, to his wife, to his kids, like, did you guys move my fence digger? Like, do you know what happened to it? Like, where is it? It's not out there. And they're like, no, we've been in the house the whole time. I have no idea. And so they couldn't find it. And a week goes by, and he's out patrolling his property looking for wolves. And in the tree, like well away from where he had been digging the post before, in the tree, his fence digging tool that's 70 pounds is like 70 feet in the air, strung up in this tree. So Terry comes back to the house and he tells his family about the fence digging tool being in the tree. And that's when Gwen tells Terry about her experiences with the groceries going back in the bag and a towel being moved around the house. And everybody in the family starts to really start being scared. We can't explain what's happening on this property, and we're very isolated. And what's the deal with all these locks on all the doors? I mean, they're starting to feel really concerned. Following the fence digging tool being found, Terry started to notice lights on his property. Initially, because this was the first couple of weeks they're there, he would see lights way at the far end of his property that looked like headlights. And he would think someone must have made a wrong turn that wound up on my property. I mean, we're kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and they'll just leave. And so when he first started seeing these lights, that's what he assumed it was. Just
I'm
people
doing a
making wrong
podcast
turns.
currently. I cannot talk.
But he started to
Is
see
your
it so
refrigerator
often that he
running?
wondered if people were illegally hunting on his property. And so one night he sees these lights on his property and he goes out to investigate. In fact, he's angry. He's had all these strange things happen. His family's on edge. and now he's mad, and he's going to take it out on this person who's illegally hunting on his property. And he starts charging out to these lights, and he starts getting closer and closer, and he starts to realize it's not making any sound. If this was like a truck, it's not making any sound. And we're in an area where I could totally hear that if it was a vehicle, and he can't hear anything. And as he gets closer and closer, the lights start retreating from him without making a sound, and then float up into the sky and disappear. And Terry's like, what is going on here? The winter rolls around, and it's a particularly brutal winter. And one night he couldn't account for one of his cows, and so he's out looking for this one stray cow, and he searches his whole property, and there's only one area that he hasn't searched, and it's that forest where that giant wolf had disappeared after marching in there, and they tracked it in there. And so he goes in there, and as soon as he gets to the tree line, he notices there's a bunch of footprints from what looks like a cow. And he's relieved because it's probably his. He follows it into the woods, and much like the wolf that had just disappeared in that muddy, like sodden area in the forest, in the same spot, the footprints that appeared to be this cow had also just, well, disappeared. And then over the course of the remainder of the winter, that would happen 4 more times. The animals would run away and just disappear without a trace. By the end of the winter, after all these animals have just mysteriously disappeared, Terry and his family, but Terry in particular, has really gone into full paranoia mode. He, at night, would just, like, stalk his own property, like, hiding behind bushes with his weapon, and, like, hope to see what was taking his cattle. And so one night, as he's doing another fruitless search around his property, he catches out of his periphery what looks like a kind of mass of something moving around in the trees near his property. And at this point, he was kind of obscured by some shrubs and some plants. And so he kind of crouched down and looked out at the tree line. And he sees in the tree line this like strange shape kind of moving about inside of the trees. And he would describe the mass as looking almost like a stealth fighter jet, but really small. And it was making no sound, and it was hovering about 20 feet off the ground. And he's crouched down, not making a sound, watching it. And it's just kind of like moving around the tree line, and it has these lights that looks to be kind of scanning the ground. And it's just kind of moving around. It's shining these lights, these multicolored lights in the ground. And Terry moves a tiny bit to get a better angle on this thing. And he makes the tiniest of noises against the brush, just like a tiny little, barely audible sound. And this mass that's pretty far away, the lights immediately turn off, and it angles itself so it's facing directly at Terry. And Terry can feel it right away that it's heard this tiny little sound he's made, and now it's staring directly at Terry. And Terry's like terrified, and he's looking at this thing, wondering like, oh my God, like, is it gonna come take me? Like, what is this? Is this the thing that's been taking my livestock? And he's terrified, and he's staring at it, and it just flies away. By the spring of 1995, things have gotten really, really bad for Terry and his family. Now, not only are they losing livestock inexplicably, but they're showing up. The actual cows themselves are showing up back on their property, hours or days later, just kind of in random locations on the property, and they look like they've had surgery done, like precision cuts, and pieces of them are missing. And in addition, some very strange things are happening at the house. At night, they would see these entities walking around their property, these humanoid, they described them as having no expression, just walking around their property. And sometimes they would walk right up to the glass, put their hands on the glass, and look in, but there was no face. And like Terry and his family, they had blinds down, and they would use the deadbolts on every single door and window, but they could hear them rapping at the glass, and they could hear them communicating in a language they didn't understand right outside of their house. And this became so regular that it was almost impossible to sleep. Terry's kids started performing very poorly in school because they weren't sleeping. Terry's wife, Gwen, she lost her job at the bank because she wasn't sleeping, and she was like delusional. They were all just at an absolute breaking point. Terry is now feeling totally disheartened. One night, he's sitting on his porch with his rifle, and he notices out on the horizon a new phenomenon. He was used to seeing the lights on his property that would be off in the distance, that would disappear, and He had previously seen that kind of like fighter jet thing that was scanning the area. Like, those were two types of lights he would see, but there was a new light he saw as he's sitting on his porch. It was almost like this orangey orb that appeared off in the distance. Since he had his rifle with a high-powered scope on it, he just lifts up his rifle and he looks through his high-powered scope and he zooms in all the way, and he can see that this orb, he describes it as a portal. That as he's looking at it, it has almost like an oval shape to it, and even though it was nighttime, in the middle of the orange orb is this blue sky. It's as if he's looking through a portal into another world where it's broad daylight and there's a sky. And he doesn't know what to make of it, but he can see that a black figure is crawling out of this portal into his property, and it looks just like the black entities that were kind of basically walking around his property at night. In addition to these figures that are crawling, like imagine that scene from The Ring where the girl crawls out of the well. They're crawling out of this portal into his property and then scurrying away into the tree line. And he sees weird craft as well coming into his property through this portal, and then the portal shuts and disappears. Following this night with the orange portal, Terry started to notice blue orbs that he and his family would say were the worst and most terrifying thing of all of the things they experienced. And considering they had tall, featureless black humanoids peering in their windows and rapping on their windows, that's saying something, okay? So a blue orb started showing up on their property, and the way they described it, Terry and his family, was whenever the orb came near you, it gave you this extreme sense of anxiety. It was almost like it was emitting this feeling that you automatically got where suddenly you were unbelievably anxious and terrified of the blue orb. And then as soon as it left, you would, not be anxious anymore. And so one night, he's sitting on his porch like he had begun doing, and he sees this orb show up on his property. And his 3 dogs are sitting with him that see the orb, and they start growling and barking, and so he lets his dogs go, thinking that maybe they can scare this thing off. And the dogs take off running towards this blue orb, and they chase it, and you can see the orb, Terry can see the orb that starts to kind of retreat. And he's thinking, oh my goodness, I finally won something. My attack dogs are going to scare this orb away. And they chase off into the woods, and he sees this thing, the blue orb, retreat into the woods. And then when he's thinking, again, that finally, a little victory for us, he hears his dogs yelping. And he's too terrified to go check it out. And so he ends up going inside and locking the doors, locking the windows like they had been, and just kind of retreating. So the next day, when the dogs haven't returned, Terry and his son, they go out looking for the dogs in the forest. And when they get out there, they get to a clearing, and they find 3 stacks of ashes in like little burned out circles, as if there had been a fire previously in these 3 little spots. And it turned out it was the ashes of his 3 dogs that had gone into the woods. They had just been vaporized. Terry decides that it's time to leave, and he wants to sell the ranch. And so he puts the property up for sale and goes to a local news outlet, and he tells them about what's happening on his property. And as fate would have it, a billionaire by the name of Robert Bigelow, who had invested millions of dollars in standing up this scientific research team, this all-star team of PhDs, specifically to research what he described as high strangeness, which really is just paranormal. Basically, he was obsessed with the paranormal and wanted to investigate the paranormal. And he had actually seen that fairly obscure story. When he saw that it was up for sale, Robert Bigelow, the billionaire, saw this great opportunity to buy the piece of property and actually make it the headquarters of his own scientific research team. Not only to investigate what was happening on Skinwalker Ranch, but use it as kind of a hub to do other scientific research. So he purchases the ranch, and Terry actually, even though he did not want to spend any time at the ranch, on some level wanted to know what the research was going to show, because he was very curious, like, what is going on at this ranch that's been plaguing my family. So he offers to stay on as kind of like the ranch manager, because Robert Bigelow and his team are a bunch of scientists and business people. They don't have any experience on the ranch, and so they're happy to keep him. So Terry is still connected to the ranch, but at this point he's sold it to Robert Bigelow. So Robert Bigelow's scientific team was called the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS, N-I-D-S, NIDS for short. And Bigelow had actually built the team before purchasing Skinwalker Ranch, and what he went out and did is he recruited some of the most incredible scientists and PhDs he could possibly recruit, but he didn't want people that were interested in the paranormal. He wanted people that were inherently skeptical, so that if he was ever able to kind of prove the existence of high strangeness, that he would have credibility in doing that. And so he went out and found these incredibly skeptical, incredibly smart scientists and PhDs. And so they move into Skinwalker Ranch, and the first thing they do is they need to start doing testing to make sure that this whole, all the stories about Skinwalker Ranch coming from Terry and his family were not just some grand illusion by the family, that they could have just made it up. And so they get in there and they start running these tests. So that first year, as they're running these tests, which are largely things like, okay, let's check the environment and see if there aren't any, plants that are giving off spores that could be hallucinogenic that they're breathing in. Let's check their water supply and make sure there wasn't something happening in their water supply. Let's do psychological assessments of the family. Let's ask neighbors. Let's do all of our diligence to make sure it's not something environmental or psychological. And over that first year, while they're doing this research, there isn't much activity at the ranch, save a couple of instances where there were some strange lights. So that first year is fairly uneventful, but what's important is that the NIDS researchers come to a conclusion that this did not seem like a hallucination. This did not seem like a something coming from a plant or water supply. This seemed like the Terry and his family were really experiencing something odd. They just didn't know what it was. One day, Terry and actually Gwen, who was helping him, were tagging some of the new calves, the new cows that have been born, putting these little tags in their ears. And so Gwen was there helping. And so Terry and Gwen, they tagged this new calf, put a yellow tag in its ear, and they move on, and they're tagging other animals. And so for about 40 minutes, their eyes and their attention are not focused on this one calf or that one area of the ranch. They're tagging other animals, and then their dog that was with them starts growling and reacting in the direction of where this calf had been. And so Terry and Gwen turn around and they look, and they don't see anything, and they start walking over. They find the calf that they had tagged about 40 minutes ago has been basically surgically dissected, and all that's left are its legs and its head. And in addition, the ear where that tag was had been removed. And so they immediately call over the NIDS researchers. So the NIDS veterinarian comes over and looks at the scene and just can't make sense of it, because the incisions on the calf were so well done that it looked like someone with real surgical expertise had done this on an operating table. There was no sign that this was done by a predator, and there was no blood anywhere. So this prompts a massive search of the property, because in many ways, this is what the NIDS researchers are looking for, are real occurrences of something that is highly strange that they can go investigate. And so all of the researchers and everybody there begins searching the property for whoever was responsible for this dissection of the cow. And they start searching the property, and the dogs, they had all these guard dogs that were kept at each of these observation posts that they had set up around the ranch as soon as the NIDS team had moved in. They were all looking in the same direction, all four of these four observation posts, and they're all cowering in the back of their cages, all looking in the same direction. And so they start making their way towards the tree line where all these dogs are looking, and they stop short when Terry says, "I see something in the tree." So they stop their car and they're looking, and in the tree is this massive wolf, this like wolf-like humanoid that's basically perched on a tree limb. And Terry takes out his rifle and he aims at the creature up in the tree, this huge creature. And everybody sees it. All the NIDS researchers are looking at this creature, and they're like, "Oh my God, what is that?" Terry starts firing at this thing, and it just disappears into the woods. And so the team charges into the woods. They fan out, and they pick up a couple of tracks of this huge thing that has like this massive footprint with these huge claws. But much like the wolf that had disappeared and the cattle that had suddenly disappeared when they went into the woods, they couldn't find any traces of this thing. But they did smell this horrible stench that Terry remembered smelling. It stuck with him that first day when that large wolf had come over on the very first day they were moving in. It was that same smell. But they couldn't find this huge animal. So dumbfounded, the NIDS researchers just go back to the property and no one can make sense of it. And they have the footprint and they have their own eyewitness testimony, but like they couldn't make sense of how something that big could just get away. And so over the following month, they're like searching the property and they're looking for any more signs of this huge creature or anything. The only thing they noticed is that the guard dogs consistently stayed in their kennels and did not want to come out. They were acting like they were kind of being hunted. And they were they were cowering quite a bit and they were scared to go out in the open, but they couldn't find anything. So it was around this time that Terry and Gwen are kind of back to doing work around the ranch, and one day they're driving off to one section of the ranch and they pass by the corral where 4 of their prized bulls were. These are very expensive animals that are all in this enclosure. And so they drive past and they take a mental note that they're seeing these bulls in this enclosure, and they drive off to the other side of the ranch where they're doing some work, tagging animals and, building fences, whatever it is they were doing. But when they come back and they round a corner where they're first able to see that corral of bulls again, they are like, where are they? Because the bulls were not in their enclosure and they weren't anywhere. And so they're panicked because these are very expensive animals, and they run over, and Terry sees that the gates to the corral are still locked, but there's no bulls in there. There's no sign of a struggle or anything. And it just so happens that right next to the corral was this fairly small trailer that hadn't been used in years. In fact, it was literally wired shut. It was just sitting there. And Terry, just for whatever reason, runs over and looks in one of the windows. And inside of this tiny enclosure are these 4 bulls, completely calm, all crammed into this tiny trailer. They could barely fit. They're not fighting with each other or anything. They're just calmly sitting there as if they're in some kind of a trance. And Terry yells to Gwen, like, hey, they're over here. They're right here. And it like startles the bulls out of their trance. They start panicking and kicking, and they end up getting them out of this enclosure, and it takes them hours to finally round them up and get them back in the corral. But they're unharmed. But it is almost impossible to get even one bull into that small of an enclosure. It would take hours to maybe be successful at doing that. To get 4 bulls into that enclosure was pretty much impossible. And to do it when they basically were calm after they were in there is also somewhat impossible. And it was important to note that Terry saw when he looked in the window that the only entrance to that trailer was wired shut still. It had not been undone. In fact, the cobwebs at the corner where the opening basically formed with the sides of the trailer, they were still intact, like it had not opened. And it made no sense how those bulls got in there. And so the NIDS researchers come over, and they can't make sense of it either. Upon further investigation, the NIDS researchers found that the bars of the corral that held the bulls, a section of it had been highly magnetized. And so while they're doing this research, trying to figure out if magnetic fields has anything to do with the strange occurrences at the ranch, 2 of the NIDS researchers were on the outskirts of the property using their compass to look for magnetic fields, and they started smelling. They both reported smelling that horrible metallic, like rotting smell that other people had reported smelling anytime they saw that large wolf creature. And when they started smelling it, their compass started to flitter and then pointed away from north towards wherever the smell was. And they remember thinking that they felt like they were being watched. And it went on for a few moments, and their compass didn't waver. It was aimed in the direction of the smell, and they're both on opposite sides, pointing in the same direction. And then at some point, the smell stops, and they stop feeling anxious, and the north arrows go back to the way they should have been. And then one of the most terrifying of all of the paranormal occurrences that happened at Skinwalker Ranch happened at the very end of 1997. 2 NIDS researchers were up on a ridgeline overlooking the homestead. Every night it became commonplace to basically position NIDS researchers all over the property to basically be on the lookout for weird things that are happening. And these 2 researchers are up on this ridge, kind of obscured and hidden, and they see this orange orb take shape right near the homestead. And one of them had an infrared goggles, and so he looks down at the orb, and he can clearly make out that it's this oval-shaped opening that sounded an awful lot like what Terry had seen on his porch when he saw that humanoid creature crawling out of the portal into his property. Well, these two researchers are looking at this portal, and they see the same thing. They see this black human-like creature crawling out of this orange portal onto the ground, and then it starts running up the hill towards them. And they're like frozen with fear. They start smelling that horrible, rotting, metallic smell as this big human-like creature bounds up the mountain, and they can hear the shale under its feet as it runs up, and it goes right past them. About 30 feet away from them, they're looking at it, and it just barrels past them at a full sprint up into the mountainside. The following year, in 1998, the activity on the ranch declined significantly. All they have was the occasional strange lights here and there, but for the most part, it was done. And in fact, even though NIDS remained on the property, by 2004, the research just wasn't amounting to anything, so they pulled the plug on the operation. They did have footage of a number of the lights that were seen, but again, no one's going to take a picture of some random lights and say, oh, there you go, proof. They demonstrated that there were, magnetic fields, and they have images of these calves that would reappear after looking like they'd had surgery done to them. They had hundreds of eyewitness reports. They have all this information, but none of it was really definitive proof, which was very frustrating to Robert Bigelow, to Terry and his family. And the way they described it is they felt like they were dealing with an entity or a group of entities that were just consistently one step ahead of them, that they could catch glimpses of what they were doing, but it was never enough to really understand what was happening. They never felt like they were in control. It was always clear that this entity or these entities were in control of the situation, and they never were in a good position to really record hard data or get good footage. Not to mention, this is 1998, this is the late 90s. No one just had an iPhone they can pull out and snap pictures. You had real cameras. And so the best they could do was some pictures of light and some of the animals that had been mutilated. There's been numerous books put together by some of the people that were a part of this NIDS research team, and to this day they believe that what they saw was a result of some paranormal activity. And to this day, many people believe that this is one of the most credible instances of paranormal activity occurring. So I'd love to hear what you think in the comments, whether you think this is a total fact or
Okay, that is the first video. What do you guys think?
So, Skinwalker Ranch is something that's been investigated numerous times with varying results. It all comes down to what you believe, I think, for situations like that.
I think what I find most interesting is those portals that he talked about. And the fact that Toan actually mentioned the Navajo and everything. Basically,
Which
I think it's just those considering what they do consider the witches, you know, them coming out of those portals, or at least having something that size though they'll come barreling up a hill at you. Like, good lord.
doing a little bit of research, I found that they were known to run around 200 miles in a day, or in a night rather. And I also found that they often likened them to shamans, which with shaman powers, the portal kind of makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And also the shape-shifting into a wolf.
Imagine though being some people, having a family of people who can all give you the same exact clarification details of a wolf that's 6 feet, that's above your head. If you look at the size of a normal man, it's about 6 feet. 5 feet to 6 feet. 5.5 to 6 feet, whatever. That range span. Think of a wolf that is 6 feet wide. How tall that has to be, Things the size of a truck, basically.
To liken that more into a species of a wolf that we know, it would be more akin to a dire wolf.
Yeah, but a dire wolf on steroids, basically.
Right.
Yeah, the only thing that comes close is like the larger species in Siberia that kind of roam freely without humans fucking with their environment in any sort of way. It's gigantic creatures. Just because it's fresh in my mind, talks of portals and things that are not necessarily of this world, but still physical manifestations of some sort, reminds me of the conjunction of the spheres in The Witcher, just different dimensions colliding at certain points along the world where, whether it be ley lines, if that's what you believe in, or certain energies being highest for manifestations to happen, just otherworldly things spawning into this dimension and wreaking havoc while they're here and poofing out of existence, in our eyes at least, because just the energy dissipates, or they have the ability to manifest and unmanifest at will. It's hard to say because we have still no real idea of what we're dealing with all these different accounts of supernatural events.
It's definitely interesting because think of the sheer size of like what animals can naturally become of. Like that one cow, I think it's what over 400 pounds, but it's like bigger than a horse. So like animals, when left alone, can become those sheer massive sizes, which is just crazy to think about. Let alone seeing one for yourself.
Yeah, no, that cow you're talking about is like 8,000 pounds.
Okay,
It's
yeah,
a gigantic
that thing's
creature that stands
huge.
like 3 people tall. Well, it did. I think it died, but it was gigantic. I think it was in the Netherlands or something like that.
Out
So
of curiosity, did that bull was it just natural or was it due to its environmental effects?
It
if
was just I think it was a
natural.
genetic mutation in that
Okay.
regard that just
Now my
allowed it to
question:
grow to
did that
massive
cow have
sizes.
children?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, imagine the genes that cow could have passed down. You know, but just
A lot of instances where you see gigantism and things like that too, they're typically recessive traits that don't pass on, and when they do, they are debilitating. So they typically don't produce offspring.
okay,
And if they do, they often come with lots of problems
most
Yeah,
likely.
that
yeah.
would cause them to die way too early anyway.
But still, just I think it's amazing thing about that. But like, that's the most things that got me in this entire story. The portals, the fact of having a 6 foot wide, wolf creature, knowing that's probably a 7 foot tall, 7 foot tall, 6 feet wide. The stance of that fucker, you know, and the fact that taking an entire baby calf's head into its mouth with no issue.
Yeah, there are years, literal decades of investigations and reports that come out of Skinwalker, and all of them have like varying degrees of success depending on time of year, when you go. It seems to be the biggest thing, but it comes and goes. That energy seems to fluctuate in that place. Whether you believe in it or not is a matter of personal opinion, I suppose. But there's
But
a
if
lot
I'm correct
of
with,
stuff.
isn't it with every single story though, they all have one thing in common: the magnetic fields, the area becoming super like magnified.
And then the anxiety pairing with that.
Yeah, the anxiety and that smell.
I
Those are
think
like the three
geologists went into
things.
that area and proved that there is a very high level of polarity in that area.
Yeah, History
That there
Channel,
are
National
compasses and
Geographic actually
things
went
that
there as
don't work
well.
right on that ranch. It's yeah.
And with stuff like that, I mean, oftentimes I mean, you could liken that to the portal being open. You know what I'm saying? Like when an area has that much energy flowing through it, it's often a practicing area of ancient witches and stuff anyway.
I just, it's just really crazy to think about this, the
One thing that I
possibilities.
one thing that I like to think about is if you just bought that place, all right, like as yourself, you bought it, You walked into that house to find bolts on every window, bolts on every door. What would you do?
I'd be like, what the fuck?
Without even seeing, anything weird first, like what?
Me personally, I would want to get in contact with the previous owners, like, or find out any medical history on them. Like, were they just extremely paranoid? Like, did you have to deal with like a lot of people coming onto your property? Like, that would be like probably my first experience. But also, my dumbass would be the one to try to remove them. So that's just the white person in me. Like, yo, what the fuck? I don't need this. But also the
I don't.
chains, though. I think that would also get my thing. Like thinking about those chains, and I've with the people I've lived with before, I have had some meaty dogs. So like you to hold a lot of like heft, it takes a lot of strength. And if I would see those two things propelling outside of the houses, would instantly tell me there were guard dogs. But to have the sheer size of certain guard dogs is what would question me what would be coming around. I think the first and only thing I would really think about would be wolves. You know, and if you have children, you probably want to keep all doors locked. So it would keep the children safe. Most likely, that's why I would believe with like the deadbolts and everything. So like a sure way to make sure your kids aren't trying to climb outside or something.
Right. So, I mean, the first assumption would be possibly it would be all natural things happening,
Hmm.
not something supernatural. So then you would possibly go down and look up the records of the house too.
Yeah, most likely. Yeah, definitely look up the records and try to figure out with the people like what happened, like if they had any like past history, like any issues with like their mental health or something.
Right. Right.
But I think it's very interesting because if you think about like even like a normal house, so you get like houses that are considered haunted. Now they have to tell you if there's any past hauntings or people believe that property is being haunted. But
Yeah, depending on what state you're in, absolutely they do. And
but
if
think
like
about
they
it
have to
back
disclose
then though.
murders and stuff.
And even natural deaths too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but back then at the time of this stuff happening, that stuff was never, you didn't have to say that. That was like taboo to think about. Like, yo, my house is haunted. Yeah, no, you would never risk saying that because, it would never get people to actually come to your house. So, if we look at back the time of when this is happening, what if something like that was something, people maybe did believe it was haunted or think the area itself, and, they just didn't, say that.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of things that haven't been disclosed in the past that people find, like you hear stories of people finding bones in the basement in crazy situations where it wasn't disclosed. Like, oh, what happened here? And sometimes people just don't know. I mean, you can build a house on anything. You never know what might have happened in the past that you're
Hmm.
literally putting something on top of and bringing that past into your present. It's hard to say.
I think anything, if people are willing to build on like the ancient Indian grounds, you know, anything like that, you have to be willing to be ready for anything at
Oh,
all
for
because
sure,
of
because
the
that
just the
residual
pure
energy.
history, you know.
Yeah.
Not just the history, but as you were just saying, Tony, the energy, like
Uh
that
huh.
could be like extremely overwhelming. Like people who go to like the burial grounds for like veterans or like scenes of where war happened, where there's still cannons there. Like people can even talk about just visiting those sites. Like the energy is like overwhelming for natural people, like normal
And
people.
I've even felt that. I went out to a haunted place a couple years back. We went. They did tours there, but we went in the dead of night, around midnight or so. We walked out there, and it was uh, it was a really old building. Give me one second.
Shy, Ben, do you have anything to, input onto this?
Not really. I've been having some head issues.
Oh,
All right. Sorry about that. Anyway, so I was out there, and it was this old building that I think dated back to like the early 1900s, somewhere around in there. But they had kind of rebuilt like the front wall of the building. So you walk past the front wall, you can see all the like the basic floor plan and stuff like that. But the residual energy that was left from so long ago was still so prevalent there. It was intense.
I know some of that energy can make sensitive people really sick. Um,
So, yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
For
what I was gonna say is the fact that you talk about visiting a place like that. I was gonna mention this has happened twice to me now. Growing up with my grandparents, and we go visit go to a house you were thinking of buying or wanting to rent out. Um, I've had two instances. First house we go to, it's like a 2-story. It's kind of run down, but it's older, kind of like Victorian style house. Um, as soon as you open the door, you're met with stairs, and I'm instantly drawn to these stairs. I'm like, I want to go upstairs. I want to go upstairs. I want to go upstairs. And being a child, you're like, no, you have to wait. Follow us, yada yada. So fine, whatever. I huff and I puff and I continue. I go upstairs. I walk past every single other fucking room. I passed every single thing, and I go to one room. And it's this like beautiful room. It has like these shelves built into the wall. There's roof access. If you go through one of the windows, you can go into the roof and get up even higher. And I'm just so transfixed on this like little area between like the two shelves that are built in, and like it's like almost wall to wall for the shelves, except like this one part in the middle. And the mindset thought that's where you put a bed at. And the guy comes up there, says, "Oh yeah, you interested in that you like this room?" And my grandparents are like, "Why?" I found an 8-year-old girl died in that room.
Yeah.
And that just kind of
and
creeped
that
my parents
draw
out. Yeah, I got
that
instantly drawn to that room.
that could have been that little 8-year-old girl reaching out because she saw somebody that was like her at the same age, so she might have like bonded with you in a way.
I want to say I was 10 years old when that happened.
Yeah, it's especially children that are really sensitive to it. When I was young, I grew up on 250 acres of ranch land, and at the bottom of the hill that separated kind of like the pasture area from the house, there was a grave, a tombstone in German that had been broken in half, which is, yeah, depending on what you believe, not great. All in German, probably a pioneer that went out, was trying to go out west and died along the way because it was like the date was faded, but it was a long, long time ago, like early 1800s during some of the earlier push west and stuff like that. Um, I swear to God, when I was young, that dude, I know it was a man. That man tormented the hell out of me every chance he got. Every chance there was enough to do something. A hand on a window of a barn, random noises, talking. He that was yeah, that's my personal experience with the supernatural. That German man, very clearly in German, with a gravestone broken in half, just letting himself be known. Absolutely wild.
Have you ever went back to it, after, now being an adult?
Yeah, I've been there a couple of times. I've put my hand on that gravestone a few times throughout my life, and it doesn't affect me nearly the same way being an adult in my 30s as it did when I was 6, 7, 8 years old.
I believe that's because we didn't have I don't want to say knowledge. What is it? The social awareness, I guess, of things. Like we're so like naive, when we're younger and everything, and so like I feel like we're so much more open to things, and it makes me think of like
Mm.
the house that I grew up most of my years. I'm talking about another story. I found this like 7 years after living in this house. I became friends with a woman that lived down the street because I got bullied growing up. She stopped some of the kids from bullying me when I got off the bus and just became friends with her. She just starts talking about the history of like the little area, the roads that we were in. I found out this crazy person took the stop sign out of the ground at the street that, right in front of her. And for some reason ran over to that house and threw it into the window that was my bedroom. Now, have no idea if it harmed anybody, anything, anyone. But it's just kind of really odd, finding out, that's where I'm living, that one room. Why that room in particular? You know, and I just, always had random fears of that happening. And I had a lot of random shit happen to me in that room too. It's just really interesting you thinking about things like how you grow up. And I had another story of my mother's ex-husband. We were all in the same house, and they had brought in over some furniture that some of the grandparents owned and everything. I'm like, yeah, it's really cool. And they have this one chair that sits in the corner. It's like a metal recline. It's like a metal rocking chair. So I thought it was really cool. But it always just start to turn, and it would
I
turn
was
to face the wall. And I'm like, huh? I always just considered it being a draft in the house. You know, that's what I thought it. And I go sit in the chair and I put my feet up, and it starts turning that way to the wall. It's like, okay, so there's an indent in the floor. Okay, that's kind of cool. Never noticed it before, but I guess, the furniture just kind of turns this way. And one day, we're across the room, sitting on the floor. We're all playing Uno. And we all just stop and we all stare at the chair at the same time just to watch it turn. I'm like, oh, hey, look, there's the draft again or whatever. And my ex-aunt, she's like, what are you talking about? And I go to tell you, oh, yeah, I'm always, always seeing the chair turn around. I've sat in it. I've picked my feet up and I get turned into the corner and everything. So I'm like, yeah, that's just what it does. She's like, no, honey, that's not what it does. I'm like, what are you talking about? They said that their great, great, great grandfather had died in that chair. And they found him facing a corner of a wall.
Yeah, that's wild. And
I swore to never sit in that chair again.
why
That's
was he
crazy.
why was he facing? Do you ever find out why he was facing the wall? Or
That's how they found him dead. He was facing the wall.
wow,
Hmm. To be honest, any story that starts with a rocking chair never ends well.
it's usually true. They're cursed objects in general.
It's like if I see a rocking chair in a house randomly sitting in the corner of the house, I'm just like, yeah, nope.
Yeah, no.
I'm good, thanks.
I know that now, but being a child, I'm like, hey, look, it's a metal rocking chair. And, I could see the upholstery had been redone and everything, so it looked a lot newer. I'm like, it's not that old. It was a really nice rocking chair. It was nice. It was, I just thought
For
it was,
kids too. As a
yeah.
kid, you're drawn to a rocking chair, rocking back and forth. Yeah, like
It reminds you of like
so
a
kids
swing.
too. It's yeah, exactly. It's just another thing that's gonna get a kid trapped in a situation where a naive person is gonna be drawn in.
So, just like little things. You're like, I'm never sitting in that thing again. And I don't think it was even a month later that my mother swore that it turned around from the corner and looked at her, and they got rid of it that night.
Oh,
Yeah, the thing was even there like a month later. I go back to the house, like, oh, it's the rocking chair. It's gone. They're like, it broke.
we yeeted it.
I was told it broke. No, my ex stepdad told me the truth. 'Cause he didn't believe in it. He thought my mom was just, on stress, like super stressed that day. But he's like, not gonna fight with the wife. I'll get rid of it. Don't, whatever. You know. They're
To
like,
this
huh.
day, it's in some random house, turning around, scaring the shit out of people.
Right?
It's just turning for no reason.
You spin my chair right round.
You turn that song on, it just starts doing circles. Like, oh shit!
Right. So I had forgotten about this story, but I have a childhood experience that I can't confirm or deny that it's linked to Indians or that culture, but it's a possibility. I used to live in a place back in California that possibly could the houses could have possibly been built on Indian land. I had a few instances in that house. Like one time, I was reading a book, laying on the couch, out of the top of my eye, going down the hallway. I see a figure that's at least 6 foot, at least, easy. Vivid color, everything. It was like Levi jeans, black and red plaid shirt, like everything. I just see it for a split second. That that was weird. I had another instance where, and it's kind of funny that the video we just watched, he mentioned the lady going to take a shower. I was taking a shower and I had my dog in the bathroom with me, and I heard like a knocking, and it was close enough that it almost felt like the bathroom door, but I didn't think nothing of it until I saw my dog stand up and look at the door.
Hmm.
Nobody else was home. I was the only one. I was by myself, and I just kind of stopped and listened, and so was my dog. And I'm like, okay, rationally thinking, okay, they came home, right? No, I got out of the shower. There's nobody home.
Did you check your doors?
I checked everything.
I would say that a lot of all my stuff happened until I got cats. Like when I got my cat, I quit having like weird things happening to me. But I have this one story. After this, we'll go to another story. But I had this weird thing. I don't know why, but it got worse progressively as I got older. Now, it did not matter where I was sleeping. If I was in my bedroom, someone else's house, on a couch, on a floor, did not matter. But I'd always be asleep, and I'd always wake up to having it like somebody sitting at my bed, sitting at my feet, and having that feeling and feeling that indent.
Now,
I'd
can I
wake
ask a
up.
quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Were you paralyzed?
No,
Okay.
no, was
Yeah,
not like a
sleep
paralysis.
paralysis
Yeah,
is
no sleep paralysis demon, not here. But I'd wake up feeling it, and I'd sit up, and I'd see an indent in my bed. I'm like, fuck this. I lay back down. But I'd continue doing it, and I would just, it would continuously happen. It would, I'd be in a couch, and I'd feel it. I'd sit up, and I'm like, yo, what the fuck? So I thought, some of my family members trying to, uh, sit on the foot of my bed. And like, no, but it would happen no matter where I went to my friend's house. So this thing, whatever it would actually follow me. And it would follow me and follow me no matter where I went. It didn't matter which way I laid down to, I would try to trick it, Yo, I'm asleep at the foot of my bed, and you're gonna sit next to my face. No. It always slept at my feet. But as I started to grow older, getting towards my 18th birthday, it started going up my body, sitting closer and closer to my head. And I remember, and it continued to happen, and it quit when I got to 18 years old. Until I want to say a year ago, I had a, it wasn't a nightmare. It was, what's the worst of nightmares? I forgot what they're called.
Night terrors?
Yeah, I had a night terror. And I was back in that fucking room. And I was like I was like laying down on my left side slash back. And I had this like dark black chain ribbon thing with me. I was holding on to it for some reason. And I get yanked by this thing. I'd get pulled off my bed, tossed into like the dresser, sitting across from me, and I go to look up, and there's this black figure perching on my floor, not my floor, but on my bed. Its feet, it's sitting like in a frog position, and I'm staring at it, and I somehow switch around, and I'm trying to get towards my door, and I'm just watching, and it jumps off, and then I wake up. But I wake up to swearing, seeing that thing sitting across my fucking room from me in the kitchen, and I cried for like 3 hours straight because of that. I had and I haven't seen it since. Hasn't come back into my mind until now, just thinking about it. But like the thing quit when I was 18, and then it happens when I'm like 20. It happened 24. I was 24 when it happened.
So it drops off upon becoming an adult,
And then
and
shows
then it
up.
tries to regrasp
And
later.
shows up at the foot of your bed in a like a ready to leap position.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah, because I started having dreams of my old room leading up to it. But the weird thing in those dreams, I had this hole in my ceiling, and I'd look up to it, and I'd just be laying on my bed looking up at it. And my whole room's the same fucking way, same way it was. I'd just be staring at it. And the hole would never change size, but it's like we somehow then gain an attic, and I'd see something peering out of it, which is what I was thinking is whatever that thing, the humanoid figure was. But I had another dream of me having the guts standing on my desk trying to shove a broom inside of there, like trying to hit it or trying to see if I would hit anything, and like just shaking it vigorously. But like in my mind, like I saw where it's looking from, and like I'm just like an inch or two, like it's ducking backwards so it doesn't touch it, but like I was an inch away from it. And then I had another dream where I duct taped over the hole because I just got so scared of it. Like I just had these like weird random dreams leading up to that night terror.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's really interesting. That was the part that I wanted to highlight out of that story is you were actually dreaming about that old room. It's like it was building you up to experience it again.
But since then I haven't had anything happen like that since. But the weird thing is, um, we lost my grandfather short after that happened. He went into a coma and everything, and we lost him. Which I know there's no correlation in it, but it's just kind of weird now to think about it.
Weird timing, yeah.
But it's just so weird. Like I had never thought about the dream, that room. I never. Who dreams about their old room? And nothing was in
mean,
the dream. It was just the room itself.
I personally never have.
I was just, just something weird. Just start dreaming about my old room. I'm like, okay, that's odd, but okay. Yeah, just random things. All right, next story. Do we want to listen to things haunting NASA or things the armed forces are scared of?
The NASA one seems kind of interesting. What's the rest of the vote in the room?
yeah. I mean, what scares astronauts is
I
you know,
mean, and
always
what could possibly be attached to the kind of stuff that they do that would bring that kind of stuff?
Okay, NASA it is.
right.
The primary criticism of virtually every paranormal story out there is a lack of credibility. Either the person claiming the events happened lacks credibility themselves, Or you just don't have any other corroborating evidence, like other people that witnessed it, other credible people that witnessed it, or in many cases, a lack of video or photo proof that said paranormal event happened. But in the case of the story today, you not only have a highly credible witness, a NASA robotics engineer, you also have other corroborating witnesses that are from that NASA engineer's family that were there and witnessed it with him. And you have, albeit limited, you do have video footage of what they are claiming happened that was paranormal. But before we get into all of that in today's story, if you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, well, that's what my channel is all about, and I upload 3 to 4 times a week. So if that's your thing, if you could gently pulverize the like button and then turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my uploads every week. All right, let's get into it. Bill Vale has always been incredibly scientifically minded. He's always had technical jobs his whole life. He took a job for 15 years at NASA as a robotics engineer. He also spent a little time as a pilot for NASA as well. He is just somebody that is very process oriented. And in fact, his family and friends, they say this with respect, but they say that, Bill, he lacks an imagination. He's super pragmatic, super to the point, and doesn't really have time for, call it, creativity. He's all about facts. In 2002, Bill and his wife separate, and it catches Bill a little bit off guard. And it almost prompts like a midlife crisis for him where, before it had been really his work with NASA that had been fulfilling to him. And now he has this huge gap in his life, and suddenly, he's looking around and he's like, what am I doing all this for? I don't have a family anymore. Like, what am I doing? And so he decides to move back home to Arlington, Texas, where his little brother lived. So when he gets to Arlington, he feels like he can have a fresh start in a way. He has family around, so he doesn't feel quite as lonely, and he actually just takes a job at his brother's water purification company because he wasn't sure what he was going to do. He just knew that he needed to do something. So he gets a job at this water purification company, and he starts working with his brother, and he finds that even though it's not the same type of work that he was doing as a robotics engineer at NASA, it was nice to be working day in and day out with a family member. So Bill has only been living in Arlington for just a couple of months, and he had only been at the water purification company for maybe a couple of weeks. And so when a Saturday house call was called into the company and no one really wanted to do it, Bill thought, you know what, I'll take one for the team, make a good impression on my coworkers, and I'll take the house call. And what it involved is part of Bill's job was to go demonstrate how to install and use this water purification system in customers' home. The dispatcher for the water purification company said to Bill, she goes, hey, listen, this is a little bit weird, but the person who called was adamant that you be there at 5 o'clock, not a minute earlier, not a minute later. And it was probably only about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he's like, so what do I do? And she's like, I don't know, like, go get a bite to eat and just make sure you're there by 5. And so he does that. He's like, that's weird. But he drives around and he parks outside of the house a little ways down the street. And a couple minutes before 5, he gets out and he starts heading over to the property to do this house call. He starts walking up the path to this big brick house at like 4:59. And as he's getting closer to the steps, he can hear through the front door, which you can already tell it's slightly open. It's not latched all the way. He can hear screaming inside of this house. It sounds like a woman screaming, and it actually sounds like she's screaming, get out of here. But he doesn't really know what to make of it. He has a job to do, so he walks up to the door, and even though it's open, he knocks. And now he can literally hear through the crack in the door that someone in this house is screaming. And he's listening, and finally he decides, well, I should probably just open it up and make sure everything's okay, because I can hear someone screaming inside, the door's open. So he opens it up and he walks inside. He takes one step inside of the residence and just kind of peeks around, and he can see a little bit down the hall off to the right, there's an opening to a room. And in the room are 3 men on their knees in a little circle, and a woman is walking around them in a circle, and she's holding a book in her hand, and she's speaking in tongues. Just nonsensical, couldn't make sense of her language, but periodically as she's circling them and she's touching each of their heads, she's screaming, get out of here. Leave these people. Get out of here. Bill is about to leave. He knows that this is just too weird for him, but right before he does, the woman who's walking around the three men on the ground looks up at him and points directly at him and doesn't break eye contact and just holds her finger out pointing at him. And he gets this very strange sense that, like, this woman wants to do harm to him. And so he just runs out the door and is like, yeah, I'm not going back in there. Goes back to his car and he calls the dispatcher back at the water purification company. And he's like, okay, I just took an insane house call. The lady in there is crazy. I'm not doing it. Don't reschedule. And if you do not put me on it because I will not go in there. Bill was a very straightforward guy. And he's just not going to let his imagination run wild with what they were doing. You know, those people are crazy, and that's not my business. It's not my problem. And so he forgot about it. He just goes home to his house, and he turns on the TV, and he gets his microwave dinner, and he's just sitting there eating his food and just having a nice Saturday night to himself, when out of the corner of his eye in his other room, and I keep in mind, Bill lives alone and has no pets. Out of the corner of his eye, he thinks he sees something small dart across the ground. He couldn't tell if it was flying through the room or if it was running through the room, but he just was like, oh, now I got, you know, some rodent or a bird or something in my house. It must have snuck in through the chimney. And so Bill is not scared. He's mostly like frustrated that now he has to deal with some rodent in his house or some bird in his house. So he puts his food down and he turns on all the lights because he was watching TV with the lights off, turns on all the lights and just searches his house. He's like quiet, listening, trying to like hear where the thing went in his house. And he can't hear anything. And after over an hour, he just decides, well, geez, I don't know where it went. I don't know what it was. Maybe I didn't even see it in the first place. So that night, he wakes up suddenly to what feels like some small creature running over the foot of his bed, but like over his foot. And it instantly wakes him up, and he instinctively sucks his legs up to his chest under his covers. You know, as pretty much anybody would do when some random creature is running on your feet in the middle of the night. And he's like, great, this thing, it's probably, now you can tell it's a rat, it's a rodent. He's like, great, now it's literally in my bedroom on my bed. And so he flips on the lights, and now he's just mad because it's right in the middle of the night. It's the last thing he needs. And he lights on and he searches the room. He looks under, you know, his dresser. He looks in the closet. He looks under his bed. He looks everywhere. And he can't find this thing. He's stopping periodically to listen, and he can't hear scurrying or anything. Did I imagine that as well? Because, I mean, I guess I don't know if I saw something darting out of the corner of my eye when I was watching TV. I think I did. And just now, could that have been in my dream? You know, because he wasn't really awake for it happening. He woke up to it and thought it's what happened. And so he's starting to, like, tell himself that, you know what? I'm somehow creating this weird thought in my head. Like, I probably didn't see anything downstairs, and I was probably having a dream about this, you know, rodent in my house, and that's what prompted the thought that something had touched my feet. And so he's like, all right, whatever. Turns off his lights, and he goes back to bed. So Bill falls back asleep, but shortly thereafter, he wakes up again when his bed is violently shaking. And he wakes up, and his bed's shaking, and it stops almost immediately once he's awake. And he thinks that they're having an earthquake. So he jumps out of his bed, and he's looking around to see if, like, things are going to start falling on him. He runs to the window. He looks outside. He can't tell what's going on. He runs into the other room, and he can suddenly tell, because he's in a bit of a panic, that there is no more shaking happening. Now, the shaking's done. The house is totally silent. And he runs back to his bed, and he has this thought, like, could I, in my sleep, have shaken my bed? And he had one of those huge 4-poster beds, and he's, like, trying to move it. And Bill's a big, strong guy, and he can barely move his bed. And he has this, like, this memory of, my bed was literally shaking. And he's like, now this is 3 times that something strange has happened, and I can't make sense of it. And being a very kind of pragmatic person, and not one with, as his family said, a wild imagination, he did not have that. He's like, okay, let's find out if there was an earthquake. So he goes online and he starts researching earthquakes. And he's thinking maybe if the earthquake had just happened, that the news would break right then and there, some headline. There's nothing. And so he's like, okay, what other rational things could have caused my house to shake? Because, again, there's no other damage in his house. Nothing fell. It was just he felt the shaking, and that was it. And so he starts researching, like, what's in the area. And he finds that there was a military base, and actually it's an air base right near his house, a couple miles away. And he's thinking, okay, well, you know, when the fighter jets are taking off, that take off at all hours, maybe there's a sonic boom from one of the jets accelerating. And he didn't know if that was it, but he thought it could be it. And Then he's like, oh, well, there's also all these oil rigs that are drilling in the area. Maybe there was an accident. So he's researching for, recent accidents at oil rigs. And he's trying to find a rational explanation for this bed shaking incident. He also can't help but feel like, what happened with that thing I saw that was like touching my feet? Like, he's not connecting the two events, but he has this weird sense that either something's wrong with him and he's losing his mind, or something really weird is happening in his property. So as he's trying to find this rational explanation, his internet goes out. And so he tries troubleshooting it a couple times, but he can't get it to work. And so he calls his service provider to just have them see if they can fix it. And so he calls customer service, somebody picks up, and they're like, yep, your internet's out, let me fix it for you. Let me put you on a brief hold. And so they put him on hold, and as he's sitting there, like, listening to elevator music, like, staticky sound started coming through the receiver, and he's just noticing it. It's nothing significant. But then a voice comes into the phone that is speaking in tongues, like nonsensical language, and it sounds almost threatening. At some point, Bill is just totally unsettled by this voice, because it's just going on and on. He's been on hold now for like 2 minutes of this weird voice. He just hangs up. And like in just a couple of seconds, he gets a call back from the same customer service rep that he had just been speaking to. And he had an accent, and Bill picked up on it and said, hey, was I just talking to you? And the customer service rep was like, yes, sorry we got disconnected. And Bill says, did you hear that voice? Did you hear that strange voice on the phone? And the customer service rep, who's mostly operates on a bit of a script, kind of deviates for a second and says, actually, yes, I did hear that. And I was actually trying to figure out how that could have been possible, because we use a very secure phone line when we talk to our customers, and there's really no way for someone to actually block my ability to speak to you. Like, even if someone was on the call, you would still be able to hear me, and I was trying to yell to you and you weren't hearing me, so I don't know how that would have happened. If I definitely heard the voice, I don't know what that was, and we're so sorry. So both of them are definitely weirded out by it, but the customer service rep, he's got a job to do, and he's like, hey, your internet works again, thanks, talk to you soon. He hangs up, and Bill's left with his internet working again, but now that's the fourth strange thing. He has the thing that runs across the room as he's watching TV. He has the thing that ran across his feet at night. He has his bed shaking, and now he has this like devil voice speaking in tongues on the phone that the customer service rep also heard and couldn't make sense of. He decides to, I'm done doing research for the night. It's 3 in the morning or whatever it was. I'm gonna just try to get a couple hours of sleep because this is just starting to freak me out a little bit. So Bill gets back in his bed and he's trying to sleep, but he can't stop thinking about the fact that there have been 4 strange occurrences in the span of just a couple of hours, and he can't help himself but start to feel a little bit worried that something that he doesn't understand is going on, something bad is going on. And as he's sitting there desperately trying to sleep, he swears he can hear some sort of sound underneath his bed. He knows it could be his mind playing tricks on him, but it doesn't matter. He thinks he hears it, and it's now he's officially spooked. Like a child, he pulls the covers over his head, and he's just laying on his bed with the covers over his head, just basically trying to convince himself, like, this isn't happening. There isn't anything under your bed. Just relax. Nothing's happening. He's got his legs sucked up, up near his chest. He's just under his sheets. And the way he was positioned is he had left a light on in his room, and there was a light basically beaming down onto the sheet that was over the upper part of his body. So there's a little bit of light into the cavern under his sheets. And so he's holding it up over his head, and as he's sitting there, like trying to tell himself that nothing's going on, he looks down towards the foot of his bed, under his covers, right? And he sees a hand slowly reaching up from the side of the bed, come up and try to grab his foot, and it just misses and then retracts out from under the bed. Bill literally leaps out of bed, flips on every light, and is now in just absolute crisis mode. He immediately is like up against the wall, doesn't even want to look under the bed, but eventually he does. He kind of pokes under, nothing's down there. He looks around his room, there's no sign of anybody in the room, and now it's like, okay, you've had so many strange occurrences, and none of it makes sense. Like, what are you going to do? And he had no idea. So Bill does not attempt to go back to bed that night. He goes downstairs, flips on every light in his house, starts drinking coffee like he's awake. He's like, I'm not doing this tonight. And so he stays up the rest of the night. So the next day, Bill just tries to have a normal day. He doesn't want to think about what happened the night before. So so he goes to work like normal, doesn't tell anybody about it. Again, he's a straight shooter. He's not about to be, the former NASA robotics engineer. It's like, hey, let me tell you about the paranormal stuff that's happening in my house. He's doing everything he can to not think like that. And so by the end of the day, he started to feel a little bit of anxiety as he's getting ready to go back to his house. Because he would have to potentially face some of the strange things that happened the night before. They could happen again tonight. And so he gets home, has all his lights on. He's not about to keep his lights off, and he's sitting in his chair he always sits in, the same one where he was watching TV and saw that thing dart across the room. He's sitting there and he's eating his microwave dinner and he's watching TV. Again, all the lights on in his house. And he looks down for a minute to get another bite of food. And when he looks up, a bottle is zinging towards him. And he moves his head out of the way and it hits the wall beside him and it breaks. It's a glass bottle and shatters on the ground. And then all the lights in the house go out. So Bill runs to the closet where he knows he has a flashlight. He opens it up, reaches for the flashlight, and as he's about to pull it out, he hears in the closet, towards the top of the closet, this loud slamming sound. And he had a couple pretty heavy boxes on the very top shelf in his closet, and it sounded like someone had almost lifted one up and slammed it down on the top shelf. But obviously he didn't do that, and it totally freaked him out. He grabs the flashlight, shines it in the closet. There's no one in there. There's nothing in there. And he backs out, and then the lights come back on. And his heart's racing because he knows what just happened. Someone just threw a bottle at his head. Someone just slammed something in his closet, and he's in full panic mode. And so the only person he can think to call is his brother, because he's not prepared to go to the police, because the things he would need to describe are kind of nonsensical sounding. But his brother, who's very rational, equally kind of pragmatic in his approach to everything, he calls his brother and he's like, get over here, I got some weird stuff happening in my house, and I just need a sanity check. And so his brother, Bob, his younger brother Bob, he comes over. And as soon as Bob gets there, Bill is like, he had never had a discussion about the paranormal with his brother before. So he's just like, all right, this is going to sound weird, but Bob, I need you to just go in this closet and just go in the closet. And Bob's like, what in the world are you talking about? And Bill's like, please, just go in there. I'm going to shut the door, and I want you to just tell me what happens. And so Bob's like, all right. Bob goes in the closet. Bill shuts the door behind him. Bill's just out there waiting. And Bill calls to Bob, hey, turn off the light. There's a little pull string, little tiny light bulb. Turn off the light in there. So, Bob's like, all right. Turns off the light, and it's pitch black in there. And so at the time, Bob would not tell Bill what happened to him in the closet. Mostly because if you put yourself in Bob's position, he doesn't have any of the context. He doesn't have anything that happened. He's never experienced anything like this before. And so what he experiences, he kind of chalks up to probably his own doing. He doesn't think that someone did it to him. And so what happens is he's in the closet and he feels something hit his leg. And he thinks, oh, I must have knocked into something that hit my leg, like a pair of shoes or something. And he's just standing there. And then something hits him hard in the face. And he thinks, oh, I must have hit something on the top shelf that fell and hit me in the head. But the two things combined, it did unsettle him a little bit. And he consciously decided, I'm not going to tell my brother Bill that this happened because I'll only feed into his own paranoia right now. And that's not what he needs. Opens the closet, gets out, and he's like, you know what, Bill? Nothing happened in there. You got nothing to worry about. There's nothing in here. And so he leaves, and Bill is left kind of crestfallen because he feels like he really didn't do a good job conveying to his brother just how much had happened in the house so far. He basically said, I've heard some strange noises, go in the closet. And then nothing really happened. So he feels like out of his element. He just feels like he doesn't know how to handle it. And so he has only one other person that he feels comfortable kind of letting in to this situation, because it was just kind of embarrassing for Bill. I mean, he's this esteemed NASA employee. The last thing he wants is to have somebody think that he's like losing his mind a little bit. But he has his friend Michael, who is a sound engineer that works for a couple podcasts. And when he calls him, Bill doesn't even really know what he's going to say to Michael. He just needed to talk to someone, like a friendly voice kind of thing. And he calls him, and Michael's a little bit surprised to see Bill calling him, and they have a little bit of small talk. And Bill says to Michael, I don't know how to approach this with you, but I moved to Arlington, and got some weird stuff going on in my house, and I guess I'm just telling you because I don't know what else to do. And so Michael's like a little bit caught off guard and is a little bit just worried about his friend. And he starts asking him some basic questions, just, oh, well, what have you heard? Like, what have you seen? Just not really sure if it's even remotely worth exploring, but just asking some basic questions. And as they're having this exchange, the voice that came on the phone during the call to the customer service rep for the internet provider came on the phone. And all of a sudden, Bill can't hear Michael, and Michael can't hear Bill. All they both hear is this voice, this like angry, kind of demonic sounding voice that sounds very threatening. And so while this is going on, Michael just instinctively is like, well, I have all my sound set up here, and he grabs a mic and he puts it to the receiver and starts recording. And for a minute and a half, he sits there recording this voice. And then about 30 seconds into the recording, not that Michael could hear it, Bill on the other end, who's heard this voice before, and he's starting to get the feeling that this whole thing is bad. Like it's bad. And he starts yelling to Michael to hang up. Don't listen to this. Hang up the phone. Don't listen to the voice. He's yelling for him. And then after about a minute and a half of this chaos that Michael's recording, the voice suddenly stops. And it goes back to Bill and Michael talking to each other. And it's like crystal clear. And so Michael immediately says, hey, Bill, you there? You there? And Bill's like, yeah, I'm here. I was trying to get you to get off the phone. You can't listen to this stuff. I don't know what it is, but it's bad. And Michael just goes, no, listen, I recorded that. Here, let me play it back for you. And so he starts playing it back, and it's silence. Except for when Bill was yelling to Michael, don't listen to it. Hang up. Don't listen to it. And Michael is yelling in the beginning to Bill like, hey, what is that? What is this? But then it's all silence in between. So they aren't speaking to each other, even though they're on the phone with each other. And they hear something, but the recording only picked up their voices, not the demonic, possessed sounding voice. At this point, Bill is starting to get a little bit scared. Maybe he wouldn't admit to it, but he's alone in this house and all this strange stuff is happening. And he just decides that he's going to invite his brother over for dinner. And Bill is in the chair that he always sits in, and Bob and his wife Cindy are on the couch, and they're kind of having a nice time. Bill recalled feeling, it was just nice to have other people in the house. And they're watching TV, and as they're watching TV, suddenly Bill just stands up and kind of runs over to the room where he had originally seen that thing dart by, this rodent or whatever he saw. And Bob and Cindy obviously see him get up and run over, and they're like, hey, what did you see? What was that? And Bill's like, okay, I don't know how to describe what I saw, but I saw this thing that's in my house. And, Bob, I brought you over here because I've just been seeing this animal or something running around my house, and I swear I just saw it. And he goes, hey, look, Bob, sit in my chair, because it was the only vantage point into this room. The couch where Bob and Cindy were sitting, they couldn't really see into this room. And he goes, just listen to me. Bob, sit in my seat and just sit here and just watch the TV. Don't pay attention to the room. Just watch the TV and just see if something catches your eye. Because, maybe I'm seeing something that is totally rational, but something's happening. Just do what I was doing. And so Bob's like, all right. So he sits in the chair. Bill sits next to Cindy, and they start watching TV again. And Bob, all of a sudden, just clearly reacts to seeing something in the other room, and he goes, oh my God, what is that? And they all stand up, and Bill is like, well, what'd you see? And Bob's like, I don't know. It was like some kind of small animal or something, and it looked like it was on 2 feet. It did not look like a 4-legged animal. That's like a 2-legged animal. Like, what was that? And so Bob, he's now feeling like, I was in that closet, some weird stuff happened that I didn't tell Bill about. Now this, and he's like, okay, Cindy, his wife. Cindy, you sit in the seat. You do this now. And so now Bill and Bob are sitting on the couch watching Cindy, and Cindy's watching the TV. Of course, in just a matter of minutes, she sees something dart across the room. Now, was she just kind of jumping on the bandwagon because these two saw it? Maybe. But she certainly described the same thing that Bill and Bob claimed to have seen, which was a bipedal, small creature that was just running through the dining room. And so the three of them turn on all the lights, and they start searching the house. They're going to find this animal or thing in the house, and they search everywhere for hours, and they can't find anything. Finally, after it's getting late, Bob and Cindy are like, hey, Bill, I don't know what's happening in your house, but why don't you just come stay with us? We got a guest room. Just crash with us tonight, and you can come back in the morning and call animal control or whatever you want to do, but just, you shouldn't be here tonight. There's too many weird things happening here. Bill, in a way, was actually kind of happy now he had someone that he trusted and loved, his own family, that had confirmed that they were seeing the same things he was. That even though that is terrifying, that all of a sudden Bill is alone in this house with some creature, this small bipedal creature running around the house, at least he wasn't losing his mind. Or if he was, at least other people were too. So he was kind of relieved, and he was like, you know what? I'm not going to go with you because I don't want to just like give up my house. What will I do when I come back if it keeps happening? Like, I don't want to just give this up. So Bob and Cindy leave, and now Bill is determined to now, for the first time, start looking up paranormal explanations for what was happening. So quickly, Bill realizes that you can't just search the paranormal. There's too many things online. It's so hard to tell what is considered like credible and what isn't, because there's just no fact checking going on. It's just people kind of putting things on the internet. And so what he decided he would do is, instead of him doing the research, he would find a paranormal investigative team that at least appeared to approach their investigations much the way a scientist would. That instead of looking for proof, the paranormal exists, instead that their approach would be like looking for an answer, even if that answer was totally normal. And so he starts researching for investigative paranormal teams that have a scientific focus, that are in Texas in the area, and he actually finds one, and he reaches out to them, and they were actually available that night to come over. So he says, please, come over, I need your help. So the leader of the paranormal team was a man by the name of Brian Hall. And when they get there, it's Brian and a couple of his crew members. They don't start with, diving into the paranormal investigation side. They start by looking for obvious answers, because they've found that many times when someone claims they have a paranormal event happening, it's something like, a bad AC unit, or a creaky door, or a branch outside that's rubbing against the house. And so they did a very lengthy and thorough examination of the outside and inside of the house, looking for things like that. And they determined that there wasn't anything obvious that was a rational explanation, so now it warranted setting up some equipment. And so what they did is they set up a couple of cameras in Bill's bedroom, where a lot of the activity apparently was happening. And they set up these laser beams that basically beamed lasers in every direction, and they would place them in his bedroom. So there was like laser beams all over the room. And if anything walked past any of these lasers, you would see the beams move. It's very obvious. So it's a way to detect motion in the room. And so they set these beams up, and they start filming, and for a long time, nothing is happening. Bill, Brian Hall, the team are just sitting in the dining room downstairs, just like listening to silence and watching nothing happen. And so Brian suggests, hey, why don't one of his team members go up and just literally interact with the room a little bit? Go in there, kind of like yell, do something, kind of stir it up, so to speak. And then we'll see if anything happens. And so one of the team members goes up to the room and walks in and is like, hey, is anybody in here? And, nothing's happening. You can see on the footage that, he jumps onto the bed and he's sitting on the bed. And at some point, as he's yelling out to whatever was in the room, like, hey, if you're in here, show yourself, all of a sudden, on camera, you hear a laser fall. And he jumps out of bed, and he runs out of the room, and the rest of the team comes up, and they gather up the cameras, and they immediately watch the footage. And as they're watching the footage, you can see this mist that begins to form in the room that the team member who was in there just didn't see. And the mist starts swirling in front of the laser beams on the camera before you hear off camera one of the laser beams falling to the ground. So at first they're just kind of dumbfounded, and they're like, well, how did the mist get in there? Like, what is that? And is it possible that perhaps the laser beam rolled off a table or something? Maybe it was positioned in such a way that it could have rolled off. And so what they did is they raised the sound levels inside of the actual video, and they made out a couple of words. And so at this point, Brian Hall and his team feel like they have quite a bit of data that actually does lend credibility to the idea that there is something paranormal happening in Bill's house. So as they're packing up to leave, they say to Bill, like, you gotta go. You can't be here. Like, I'm surprised you're still here now. And Bill just was this super prideful guy, and he just was like, no, I'm gonna stay. Like, I've made the decision. I'm not gonna run. I'm gonna stay here in this house. And they're like, that's a bad idea. And honestly, they were right, because some pretty horrible stuff happens after they leave. So that night, he knows he's not gonna sleep. So he has all his lights on in his bedroom. He's sitting with his knees tucked up to his chin. He has upbeat music, like classical music, but very upbeat music playing on the radio right next to his bedside. And he's just trying to like kind of create good vibes in his room. And so as he's sitting there, he hears what sounds like a Mack truck smashing into the side of his house. Like it was so loud and just deafening that he instantly sprints out of his door, runs downstairs, runs outside to like inspect the damage to his property. And nothing's outside. There's nothing. There's no Mack truck. There's no damage to his house. There's nothing. He walks all around his property. He's like, did something fall on the street? Am I losing my mind? Like, what's going on? And so he goes back in the house after quite a bit of looking around, seeing if something might have fallen off of his roof that made a sound. Nothing. He goes back in his house, and as soon as he steps foot in his house, he hears a similarly loud crashing sound, as if, a vehicle is smashing into his house, except it's inside of his house, in his dining room. It was in the same room where he first initially spotted that thing running across the ground. And so he runs in there to look for some horrible damage to the inside of his house, but there's nothing disturbed. There's nothing shaking. There's nothing out of place. His dining room is intact. And as he's sitting there, he hears his car alarm go off outside. And now he's thinking, this thing is screwing with me. I'm not going to let it win. I've stayed here against better judgment for multiple days. I'm not going to give in now. And so Bill kind of goes into fight mode. Now he's mad. And he's, instead of being scared of what's happening, he starts screaming at the top of his lungs, like, show yourself. And so as he's doing that, he hears yet another loud crashing sound up in his bedroom. And so he runs upstairs ready to, fight with whatever this is in his house, because it's gotten to a breaking point for Bill. He charges in his room. There's nothing in there. But unlike the dining room, and unlike when he was outside, the crashing sound continues while he's in the bedroom. So he's standing in his bedroom, holding his ears from the deafening crashing sounds over and over and over again, but there's nothing moving. There is no way for the sound to be emanating from that room, but it is. And after what feels like an eternity of this horrible smashing sound, it just completely stops, and it's dead silence. And Bill lifts his hands off his ears, and he's looking around, and he's expecting it to start again, but it doesn't. And it's just dead silence in the entire house. After quite a while, and he still doesn't hear anything, he gets back in his bed. All the lights are on. His radio's on, and he tucks his legs up to his chin, and he's just holding himself basically in the fetal position. And he is, at this point, he's now just petrified. Like, he had his big fight moment, but I think he's now thinking that this thing was just challenging me back. It's basically saying, I can do whatever I want to you, and you can't touch me. I can do whatever I want, you can't touch me. And he's realizing that maybe he could have made it worse, and he's sitting there knowing he's not going to sleep. It's still the middle of the night, and he starts hearing a noise that sounds like maybe shuffling, a shuffling of feet, something's moving around underneath his bed. And as he's sitting on his bed, at the head of his bed near his pillow, with his feet tucked in, he looks at the foot of his bed, and this huge, just wide, 6-foot-tall black figure emerges in it's bright in the room. This black figure emerges at the foot of his bed. It's got this huge tooth coming out of its mouth, and it gets into this jerky position and starts moving towards Bill. And it gets right in front of him, and it puts its face right against Bill's, and then grunts, and then disappears. Bill continued to see this horrible black figure in his house, and it continued to kind of challenge Bill, and Bill stopped challenging it back. And so Bill started waking up with these scratches on his chest. He was hospitalized a couple of times, prompting the hospital to do welfare checks on Bill, because he was showing up with these mini heart attacks because of the stress that he claimed was from having this stuff happening to him. And his family's so concerned. And it wasn't until Bill started really doing some aggressive research on demons that he read about exorcisms. And he remembered that when he showed up for that house call, a lot of the language that he was hearing coming from that woman who was screaming, leave these people, leave this house, it sounded like an exorcism. And he was thinking that, do you think it's possible that the exorcist knew that she needed another host for these demons? And so she planned it so that she would have this water purification person show up right at 5 p.m. so that she could be at the part of her exorcism where she could cast the demons onto him. After 2 exorcisms of his own to his house, it still hasn't stopped. He still, to this day, is dealing with the paranormal activity in his house. And when asked why he hasn't sold his house, is he thinks that he couldn't live with himself if he ever put another person through what he has dealt with at his house. I don't know about you, but I would not have lived in that house for an additional 18 years. That just sounds like the worst. But I'm not Bill, and so he's made up his mind that that's what he needs to do. But for me, anyways, I would have left that house. I would have abandoned that house more than likely. But I'd love to hear what you would do in that.
I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I'd be able to stay in that kind of house for another fucking 18 years.
That's a long time to deal with stuff like that.
Yeah, for real, and especially to I
To
would
the
say
thing coming
don't
out of your
challenge.
bed. Like, imagine if that's 100% real. This 6-foot wide ass figure coming out from under your bed, standing away from it, doing that weird, like, robotic break, trying to walk over towards you, and being so fucking huge, it can go over your bed into your face and then grunt at you.
I mean, that'd be pretty scary, for sure.
And I'm sorry, but the only thing that I could also remind me is my friends being said I'd be the one to fuck a demon. So, my friends have said that to me.
Let's just say I might be looking for that house at a later date.
But yeah,
Not
but you
not
choose
for
to
that
do
reason.
that.
Not for that
But
reason.
test it out. See if that thing, like,
But I'm
seriously,
intrigued by this story.
like, imagine something like that coming at you that much where you're being hospitalized. Like, that's a poltergeist type demon,
Just saying, I might be trying to get a hold of this house owner at some point.
if it's still there.
Correct.
But, like, is it the house or is it him himself that it's attached
Right.
to?
Yeah, I mean, energies can certainly attach to different things.
And in the process, since he was there for so long, it could have attached to the house additionally.
It could have. There's a lot of, like, imagine it, though, coming after, like, a NASA person. Like just to see that go through his mind, to see a man like that change, I think would have worried probably a lot of people. Like, I don't think you can be in that kind of position and believe in something like this because you're, like, so, like, scientifical. Like, that's just how your mind is.
Well, I suppose it depends on the person. I mean, a lot of these people have varying religious beliefs and go to work doing scientific work every day. So, as far as the supernatural, I mean, it's not to say that they don't have separate beliefs apart from what they can prove with scientific observation.
I just find these things very interesting. And I say we're gonna watch one more video because it's actually gonna put us over our 2-hour limit. So
I do need to get back on shift. I do appreciate being here. I wish you all the best.
I was about to play the one with the going after the armed forces.
I can't. I apologize. I gotta just noticing somebody needs some help, so I gotta get going. But I love you all. Thank you for having me. And
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
It's
Absolutely.
definitely good discussions with you.
Yeah, much love.
Okay, since it's Telling and me, basically, you two are really quiet.
Had to think about making dinner and all that,
Got it. Okay, so we have a few. Choices then. We can do Family Haunted by unidentified creatures, special forces being attacked, police being attacked by demons, or the disturbing final moments of the Jameson family.
I mean, all those sound interesting for sure. Anything with demons having to do with it, I'm always down.
Should we have just like a 3-hour podcast to just watch the rest of all these?
I can't do 3 hours tonight. My apologies.
Well, then pick one. Do you want family, special forces, or police?
Family. Let's go with family.
Now, which one? The
It's-
Jameson or the disturbing final moments of the Jameson family, or the unidentified creatures, which is the apparently the Palmyra wolves? Palmyra. Palmyra?
Hmm. Sean, do you have a preference?
Um, not really.
Do the first one. What'd you say? The Jameson family?
Yep.
Yeah, that'll work.
Normally, if you're trying to solve a mystery, if you can gather more information and gather more evidence, it will make it easier for you to solve that mystery. But in today's story, that's not the case. You have a whole family that suddenly goes missing under very suspicious circumstances, and 10 years later, we still have no clue what happened to them, despite a plethora of information and evidence gathered, including a very famous videotape that shows them walking in a trance-like state right before they go missing. But before we get into that family story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please replace the like button's shampoo with Nair hair remover, and also subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of those weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into today's story. In 2009, the Jameson family, which was Bobby, who was 44, Sherilyn, who was 40, and their daughter Madison, who was 6 years old, were living in Eufaula, Oklahoma, on lakefront property. While they seemed to be living a simple and happy life, behind the scenes, their life was in turmoil. Bobby suffered from bad chronic back pain that he had as a result of a car accident that he was in 2003. Sherilyn was bipolar. She was medicated for it, but she didn't always take her meds, causing her to lash out at her family members, and it caused bouts of severe depression. Bobby and Sherilyn also believed that their house was haunted by 3 or 4 spirits who lived on their roof. Bobby was so convinced of this that he went to his pastor and asked where he could buy special bullets that he could shoot at these spirits. So for all of these reasons, the Jameson family was actually looking to leave their property in Eufaula and move somewhere else and hopefully start all over again, fresh, with a new shot at happiness. After the Jamesons would vanish, their family and friends would say, "We had no idea any of this was happening. We had no idea they were even considering a move." Now, this move they were considering was not a typical move. They were not looking to move into another house. They were looking to move onto a piece of property where they could place their storage container and live in the storage container until at some point they were going to build a house on a mountain and then move into the house. And they had actually already found a plot of land about 30 miles away from where they were currently living in a town called Red Oak. Now, the storage container itself that they planned on living in was actually sitting on their property in Eufaula, and it drew a lot of attention from the neighbors because Sherilyn would graffiti on it, "The neighbors have poisoned our cats. Witches don't like it when you kill their cats," because it turns out Sherilyn believed that she was a witch. So unsurprisingly, the neighbors avoided the Jameson family at all cost. Several weeks before the Jameson family went missing, they actually brought in a male boarder, so a guy that was going to live with them and help with manual labor in exchange for room and board. The boarder was a white supremacist that immediately took exception to Sherilyn, who was part Native American. And so anytime Bobby was out of the house, the white supremacist boarder would get into a fight with Sherilyn. And one day it came to a head, and Sherilyn drew a gun on the boarder and said to leave the property or she was going to shoot him. The boarder refused to leave, and so Sherilyn began firing shots into the ground at his feet until he left. Now, once the Jameson family disappeared, this white supremacist boarder became one of the primary suspects. But when the FBI found him, he had a rock-solid alibi and was quickly crossed off the list of potential suspects. On October 8th, 2009, Bobby, Sherilyn, their daughter Madison, and their dog Maisie load up the truck and they start driving towards Red Oak. They were apparently going to go scout out this piece of property that they wanted to purchase to live on with the storage container. Now, according to family and friends, it was not uncommon for the Jamesons to vanish for several days at a time without telling anybody where they went. And it would turn out that they would go into the woods for these retreats where they would get away from technology in the city. When they were gone for a few days and no one had heard from them, no one thought twice about it. On top of this, Bobby and Sherilyn had informed Madison's school that they'd be pulling her out of class because they were going to be moving. So when Madison didn't show up for school, the school did not raise any alarms because they assumed she'd been pulled out of school. On October 16th, 2009, 8 days after the Jamesons had left their house to go scout out this property in Red Oak, a couple of hunters in the Panola Mountains, which is near Red Oak, found the Jamesons' truck parked on the side of the road. Now, these hunters are in the middle of nowhere, which means the truck is in the middle of nowhere. And so as they're walking over to it, they're expecting to see the owner of the truck. But as they get over to the truck, there is no owner anywhere. They called out a couple times to see if they could get this person's attention or whoever it was that owned it, and no one came over to them. They look in the truck and they see there is this very sick-looking dog sitting on the back seat. It would turn out it was the Jamesons' dog. It was Maisie. Now, the windows were up and the truck was locked, so the hunters called the police. Police show up, they break a window, and they get Maisie out of the truck. They give her food and water, and she would end up making a full recovery. They look in the vehicle, and all of the Jamesons' personal effects are in there. Their phones, their wallets, their jackets, their clothes. Underneath the front seat was $32,000 of cash in a bank bag. Also, they found this weird letter written by Sherilyn to Bobby that was this 11-page hate letter that basically accused Bobby of being a hermit, which seems like a strange thing to ramble for 11 pages about, but either way. The police did an initial search of the area looking for the Jameson family, but they couldn't find them, and so the running theory was they must have pulled over and walked into the woods for some reason, got turned around, and they're just lost, and we need to go find them. The police were able to use the cell phones that had been left inside of the vehicle and were able to use their GPS locations and track where the phones had been before coming to rest inside of this vehicle. And they saw that the cell phones had actually gone up the trail a little ways. They had been up towards the top of the mountain for about 15 minutes before coming back down and then wound up in the truck where they were when they were found. So the police walk up the hill to where the GPS said they had been, and they find all these footprints that look to be Madison's because there's a child's footprint as well as probably Bobby's and Sherilyn's. But they're nowhere to be found, and there's no clue of where they went after being up there. When they started scanning through each of the cell phones to see if there was any information about where they might have gone, they found on Bobby's phone a picture of Madison that was taken up at that little location that the GPS took them. The picture of Madison has been hotly contested on the internet for a long time now. It's hard to tell in the image if Madison is happy or sad. It's also unclear based on her body language if her parents are taking the photo or if this was kind of staged by someone else. So between the GPS showing that they had been at the top of this mountain at one point, plus the picture of Madison confirming she had at least been up there, the police started this massive search with that section on the mountain where they had been standing as kind of the center point. And they searched all around the Panola Mountains. But after an extensive search of this new area, they didn't find anything. No new leads had come in, so ultimately the search was called off. 4 years later, in November of 2013, some hikers were in the Panola Mountains, about 5 kilometers, maybe a little bit less, from where the Jameson truck was found, and they come across skeletal remains of 3 individuals. It looked like 2 adults and a child. They were laying face down side by side, and it was clear that they were not complete skeletons, but there was enough there to know for sure that these are people. As soon as the police were called, everybody assumed this has to be the Jameson family. It would actually take almost a year before they were able to confirm that yes, those bones are in fact the Jameson family. While the Oklahoma medical examiner was not able to determine a cause of death because the remains were just partial, they didn't have enough to work with, they did see that there was a big hole in the back of Bobby's skull, and there was other holes in some of the other bones that many people assumed were from bullets, but it was never determined if that actually was what it was from. As soon as it came out that it was the Jameson family's remains, the first prominent theory was that this had to have been a murder-suicide, where Sherilyn, who was mad at Bobby, she wrote that hate-filled 11-page letter that was found in the car. You know, she's unstable from not taking her medication to combat her bipolar disorder. She seems like the person that would take her family out and then turn on herself. But all of her family said she would never harm her daughter. I mean, maybe she would have harmed Bobby, but she never would have harmed her daughter. Also, why would you have brought your dog along and left your dog in the car and $32,000 of cash in the car? So that doesn't fit that scenario at all. The next theory was, well, maybe they just pulled over, walked into the woods for some reason, and then got lost and died of exposure. And that's still definitely a possible theory, except at the time they went missing, the temperatures were very mild. They were not dropping below freezing at night. It didn't rain very much, so it was kind of perfect conditions to be lost in the woods. It would have taken quite a while for them to die from exposure. And if you add in the fact that they were searching that area that they were found in pretty extensively within a few days of them going missing. If they had been lost and were only a few kilometers from the road, they would have been found in that search, but they weren't. The next theory that friends and family of the Jameson family predominantly believe is they were kidnapped. That maybe, they were driving on that road and someone flagged them down, whether it was someone they knew or someone that did not seem threatening, that caused them to get out of their car and come over to them, leaving their car the way it was with all of their belongings inside and with their dog inside, shut the door, they're not threatened. They walk over to this person or this group, and then something happens where they are either against their will or they're complicit, and they walk into the woods, never to go back to their truck, and then they ultimately pass away in the woods just a few kilometers away. However, none of those theories can account for the very bizarre video footage that they have of the Jameson family on the day they left their house to go check out the property in Red Oak. So on October 8th, 2009, the video shows Bobby and Cheryl Lynn making multiple trips, about 20 or more, from their house to their truck, where they're loading gear into their truck. But they appear to be almost in a trance, which is what the sheriff said when he first saw the video. They're walking back and forth and they're carrying their stuff into the truck, but periodically they're making trips without carrying anything. They're just walking to the truck with nothing in hand, looking at the truck, and then walking back to the house. And then they come back out and they have something in their hands, and then the next trip they have nothing. And periodically on their trek back and forth, they would just stop and just turn and look off into the distance, not interacting with each other. Bobby and Sherilyn haven't spoken to each other at all. They're just doing this weird trance-like commute back and forth between truck and house before ultimately they load up the truck and they do leave. A lot of people speculated that, well, it looks like Bobby and Sherilyn must have been using drugs. But when they first found the truck and they searched the Jameson's truck and they searched the Jameson family house, there was no traces of drugs anywhere, and their family said there's no history of drug abuse. There was also a theory that perhaps the Jameson family got tied up in a cult, and that was why they were moving and they were going to live this minimalist lifestyle, and they brought cash to, give to this cult, but in fact they had actually been the target of the cult, and that was what led to their demise. Or maybe they were complicit and they wanted to sacrifice themselves or something, but no one really knows. So these are only a handful of the theories of what could have happened to the Jameson family. So what I want to know is, do you agree with any of them? Or do you have your own theory of what could have happened to the Jameson family? Let me know in the comments. I will get back to all the early commenters. So get in there and give me your best theories. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, then if you haven't done this already, please replace the like button shampoo with Nair hair remover. Also, please subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username on both those platforms is johnballin416. I also have a ton of content on TikTok where my username is Mr. Ballin. And if you have a story suggestion, whether it's your own...
Honestly, him asking for likes was the scariest part of the story.
I know there was not much to that, and there's nothing leading towards the fact that this could be supernatural or spiritual in any way. Sadly, I think the cult part of it was the most plausible side of this story.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen some pretty messed up stuff from cults in the past, so I really wouldn't doubt it. Any kind
Exactly. Rarity, we can't hear you if you're talking.
Oh, I was saying, but why would you leave all that kind of stuff, for being in a cult?
Cults
Unless
can-
it's a death cult.
Cults are really good at manipulating people. That is what makes them a cult.
Exactly, and a lot of
Yeah.
times their requirements are very hefty, and that's part of
Apparently,
demoralizing you.
$32,000 hefty.
Yeah, that's part of demoralizing you and breaking you down and desensitizing you is actually the word I was looking for, to permanently be in the cult.
It reminds me of a story that he even covered of a cult, of where this cult had so many fucking people, and they went to go throw a party, and they all knew what was happening. And basically, it was a death party. Everybody drank this this juice or something that had tons of cyanide on it from apples, and it was just everybody died. Like thousands of fucking people just died. It's also really crazy how you can kill somebody with apples. There's a lady who did that just bought like a shit ton of apples and grinded up all the apple seeds and put it in her husband's protein powder, and it killed him because he had cyanide poisoning. Fun.
That's crazy. I mean, if you know a little bit, it's so easy to do something like that.
Fun fact: apple seeds is how you get cyanide poisoning.
Right.
Oh, great.
I mean,
yeah,
I've eaten a few of those.
All
I was
right,
just
we're
about
not
to say,
keeping
'cause it-
apples around, that's for sure.
Oops.
Seriously.
Let's
yeah.
say-
No, you can keep. It's just the fact of grinding up the apples. I think it took her 48 apples to put enough into protein powder. And what's crazy about it is cyanide powder looks like protein powder.
Jeez.
Yeah, fun facts.
I mean,
Poison
that's a lot
people
of
with
apples to
apples.
go through.
Yep, just on the podcast teaching how to get away with murder.
Oh
Nice.
no,
No.
the thing is, you want to know how she got away with it too with the cops?
Oh Jesus, here we
She
go.
baked a shit ton of apple pies.
Oh my god. That's just powdered sugar on top. It's fine.
No, they were actual
Yeah,
apple pies, and
right
she was
into the
delivering
apples.
them to like homeless shelters and everything.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no, she did like 15 apple pies, and that's how she got away with it.
Here, lovelies, I made you a pie. It only cost my husband's life.
Holy cost my husband's life. What the? Sorry, I love your comments sometimes. Sometimes, no, like all the time.
Another cool thing is, looking at being told is the fact that, so people know how many apple seeds that is. That is a normal styrofoam cup full of apple seeds. Just a little bit more fun fact for people.
Honestly, that makes sense.
Cyanide.
Oh my god, stop it.
I may or may
Fun
not
fact,
know.
she
really...
just looked that up on Google.
No, it's like how I also know how to deteriorate someone's body faster by putting yogurt in their anus.
Or just give them to
What the
pigs. They'll eat that
fuck?
thing in a day.
Yeah, but you also
Yeah.
put yogurt in their rectal cavity, and it helps faster.
I know what Weasel News first story is. Podcast canceled for teaching murder and disposing bodies.
That's just
Covered by
great.
the podcast, dude.
Wow. This is just gonna disclaimer, Towen is a guest star and not part of any of these.
Yeah, same. I'm a guest star. I have nothing to do with this.
You're on
You're
the owner's
not a
list.
guest
No,
star.
You're on the-
I'm not.
I'm not.
You're the husband to the podcast lady.
I'm not on the
I'm not
employees
involved.
list. I wasn't here.
We just won't state I'm good friends with the entire owner team. I mean, what? Allegedly, of course.
What, sister? I don't have a sister who murders and hides bodies.
I don't murder people. I just know how to murder people.
I don't know if that makes it worse.
That was off the record.
I know, it seemed pretty live and on the record to me.
I mean,
Yeah,
okay.
you guys ready for the next story?
Oh boy. All right. Yeah, let's do one more. I'm down. Because that last one honestly did not hit very well on our discussion, our topic of tonight's podcast. So,
After 3 years of intense military training, I had become a Navy SEAL, joined my first SEAL team, which was SEAL Team 2 in Virginia, and I had joined my platoon, my 25-man platoon. We had gone through all this additional training at the team to prepare for deployment, and here I was 3 years to the day, almost exactly, from when I went to boot camp, getting ready to deploy as a Navy SEAL to Afghanistan. But none of that training would prepare me for how intense my first couple of weeks in Afghanistan would be. So the flight to Afghanistan is pretty routine until you enter Afghanistan airspace, when your pilots let you know, hey, you've entered Afghanistan airspace. They turn the lights to red in the inside of the plane. and they get ready to descend very rapidly into the base where we would be landing. We can't afford to be in the air for any longer than we have to be because there's a risk of getting shot. So there's a super steep descent, and then they tell you to stay away from the windows, right? So you're avoiding the windows in case you get shot at. And I remember thinking, like, wow, like, this is really it. We're here. We're in a war zone. Like, we're nose diving into bases to avoid getting shot at. Like, it was intense, and I'm in my 20s. Like, it was just kind of cool. Then the ramp opened, the back of the plane opened, and we all got out, and we're inside of this very well fortified base. We're safe in here. And immediately I was struck by the just stunning beauty of the landscape. And I remember looking out at all these snow-covered mountains, and I remember thinking, like, how is this a war zone? This is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. I don't think I really appreciated just how foreign of a place Afghanistan is relative to where I come from. We get out to our site, and that night they wanted to go, they being the team that we were relieving, they wanted us to go on an operation. We were going to be up in the mountains. And I remember distinctly them talking about the cave systems that were in these mountains. And I remember thinking, like, how creepy that was, that we would be up on these mountains, walking around. It's so isolated, it's so foreign, and there could be, like, people hiding in caves that we could accidentally fall into one of their caves. Like, it really, really creeped me out. And so I was talking about how creepy these caves were, and the interpreter was like, what's really creepy is back in 2002, there was this fairly well documented case of another special operations unit, the Army Green Berets, coming in contact with a creature in a cave, and they actually got into a battle with it, and they lost one of their soldiers to this creature. And it was fairly well documented, but then it was quickly kind of silenced. I mean, certainly the story was interesting, but I didn't really believe it. Maybe it was some animal, maybe it was some person, whatever it was, there was some explanation to it. It wasn't until now that I actually started exploring different strange occurrences and strange events, and I looked and found some testimony from one of the soldiers that came forward anonymously, who was a part of this operation where they came in contact with this creature in Kandahar. And what struck me about his testimony is it sounds authentic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell that soldier's story, and I'm going to tell the other kind of corroborating witness stories as well, to try to give you a picture of what happened in Kandahar in 2002, and you can be the judge if you think this is fact or fiction. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place, because that's what my channel is all about, and I upload 3 to 4 times a week. So if that interests you, I would encourage you to please gently ravage the like button and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of those 3 to 4 weekly uploads. All right, guys, let's get into the story. In 2002, an Army infantry unit just vanished. They were on patrol in the Kandahar mountain range in Afghanistan, and they stopped using the radios. They stopped calling in. No one knew what was going on. They didn't call in a TIC, which stands for Troops in Contact. Basically, any military unit, if you're out on an operation and you start getting shot at, you radio in to your higher command, hey, troops in contact, or TIC, which signals to them, you need to get aircraft on standby, you need to get ready to send reinforcements, they need to be ready to support you. But they only do that if you signal that you're in a TIC. And it's, a lot of people, if anything, will call it in too early. Units are known to call it in almost prematurely sometimes. And so the idea that a unit would vanish without calling in a TIC or any sort of communication about any gunfight or any ambush or anything, it's a little bit strange. And so they disappear. The Army decides that in order to find them, because this is obviously a really big deal, they would get their most elite unit, so the Army Green Berets, that's their very elite special forces, they would send them out to find this missing unit. And so one soldier that was a part of that elite special forces detachment, who just goes by Mr. K, he would come forward years later and tell the story of what happened once they were tasked with this mission. So they leave via helicopters and they fly out to the Kandahar mountain range, about 4 clicks, so 4 kilometers about, from where they believe was this infantry unit's last known location. And so they land and they start doing this fairly methodical search through the mountainside. They knew that they were in enemy territory, and at any time they could get into a gunfight, they could be ambushed. There's all these cave systems all over these mountains. And so it's slow moving to begin with. Plus, they're looking for this lost infantry unit. So it's just a very slow movement through the mountains. And so over the first few days, nothing really happened. They didn't come in contact with the enemy. They didn't see any sign of this missing infantry unit. They just walked along the mountains carrying a bunch of gear, and that was it. At some point, they noticed a little bit farther ahead that there was this distinct pathway leading up the mountain and kind of around the corner. And it looked like a goat trail. There were lots of goats that would run around the mountainside, and it looked like a very well-developed goat trail. And they decided, let's just go up there. If nothing else, we can go up onto wherever this leads us and maybe look down across the other side of the mountain and see if we can see anything. And so the team starts making their way up this goat trail, and as soon as they start making their way up, they start noticing that there are little pieces of American military equipment on the ground. There are pieces of radios, like whip antennas and housing of the actual radio itself. They found military-style backpacks as well, and they started finding pieces of uniforms that belonged to the missing infantry unit. They knew based on the patches that were on these uniforms. So as they're walking up this trail of broken equipment and uniforms, they start seeing some bone on the ground. They didn't know if it was human bone or what. They start seeing broken bones scattered on their way up to this kind of plateau. And so now the Special Forces team, I mean, they're incredibly well trained. I mean, I'm not just being biased here. I mean, the Army Green Berets, the Army Special Forces, they're very similar to the Navy SEAL teams, which I was a part of. Two different units, no doubt, but very much peers. And the level of training you get in handling situations like this one, now granted this one's pretty unique, you're so well trained that when things start getting dangerous, it's like your training just kicks in, and everybody's does. And so I would imagine that when they saw this, what they were thinking is, this was an ambush. This infantry unit was ambushed, and we're probably coming up on the ambush site. And so they're, taking defensive positions, and they're moving slowly and very tactically up this mountain, and they're keeping their weapons pointed at the leading edge on their way up to the top of this mountain. They get to this plateau. It's like a flat section of the mountain, right? It's like a steep mountain, and there's like this little like shelf almost. And there's more equipment scattered and more bones scattered across it. And there's all these cave entrances right in front of them. It's like, as if they were intentionally placed so that they fed out onto this shelf. And so they start moving towards the mouth of the cave.
Where did he say they were?
And they realize, without even getting very close, that even though the mouth of these caves are pretty large and everybody could go into the cave, there is a steep drop-off.
Okay.
Like you'd walk in and then it goes straight down. And someone kind of peered over the edge and couldn't see how far it went down. And they decided that it was just too dangerous to go in there because clearly something happened here where American lives were lost, based on the tattered uniforms and equipment. And so let's just pull back and take up defensive positions looking at the entrance to all of these cave entrances. And so as leadership goes down kind of out of the fatal funnels, if you will, outside of these caves, Mr. K, who's the guy who's told us this whole story, he said he's looking at one of the entrances to the caves and he sees a flash of movement inside of the cave. And he looks over at it. He doesn't have time to react to it or anything. And all of a sudden a spear comes flying out of the cave. This big, massive lance comes flying out, and it goes right through one of his teammates whose name was Dan. And so Dan's down. And so the whole team saw that. They didn't see who threw it, but they certainly saw the spear hit Dan. And so as they're shocked and just keeping their weapon up, wondering what's going to happen, out runs this, by Mr. K's account, a 12 to 15 foot tall man with a red beard and red hair down past his shoulders, comes charging out, howling like a war cry. He's got animal skins for clothes. He just looks super dirty. And he runs over to Dan to pull the spear out and probably use it again. And the rest of the team at this point is broken out of their shock of what they're seeing, and they start engaging this giant. And the giant didn't really have a chance to fight back, and in 30 seconds the giant is down too. So Dan's down and the giant is down. And the whole team is like, what just happened? So after the dust had settled and all the shooting had stopped, they went to check on Dan, and Dan had passed away. And so they called back into higher headquarters, and they're trying to describe what happened. A very large, possibly human creature threw a projectile that hit Dan. And so they sent 2 helicopters out, one to retrieve Dan and the team, the other just to hoist up this very large human-like creature because they wanted to know what it was. And they struggled mightily to get the netting around this big creature. It ended up weighing over 1,100 pounds. It had 6 toes on each foot and it had 6 fingers on each hand.
Holy shit.
They load it up, they string it onto this helo, and it takes off. And the team gets into the other helicopter and they go back expecting to be debriefed as soon as they get back to base. The helicopter with the Giant would fly to an airfield and they would meet up with a crew of a C-130, which is another big military aircraft. The pilot of that craft would publicly say that he remembers seeing a 12 to 15 foot tall giant person with 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot. And he would say that's what he saw, even though it was later redacted and made top secret. Mr. K and his team, they flew back to the base to be debriefed, and so they had to provide an after-action report. It's something done in the military. You go out, you do any operation, you come back, and you write up what happened. And so Mr. K and his team decided to just be honest about what they saw. And so they described it again in detail. 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot. It came out, it threw the spear, it hit Dan. It's this horrible situation. And once they submitted it, their leadership said, you got to rewrite that. We're not going to accept that. So Mr. K said they ultimately rewrote it, and it just sounded like a typical engagement in the mountains with the enemy. And it was made top secret, and they never saw it again. And that was it. Mr. K said that he and the rest of his team also had to sign non-disclosure agreements to not ever talk about what they saw. And they never got any word about what actually happened, what did they do with the body of the giant, and they just never got any clarity out of it. It was just basically made top secret, redacted, and they were told don't talk about it. So it would take until 2016 when Mr. K finally just said, you know what, screw it, I'm going to go public with what I saw because my friend died and they're acting like, this didn't happen, but it did happen. And so that's why we have this detailed report of this mission where they came in contact with the Giant of Kandahar. I don't know how I feel about this story. I do think that if there was a place...
Can't hear you, sis.
I was saying the Giant of Kandahar.
Mm.
Imagine something that huge, though.
Yeah, and did you see the opening to that cave? It was massive. For scale, the pile of rocks they had,
No,
next to
I did not see that.
them walking in, it's a pretty big cave.
Well, think about it. 16 feet tall.
Yeah, exactly.
11,000 pounds or 12,000 is what they said, something like that. That is a big extra. But it reminds me of the African women. The women that that would get that super ginormous.
Right. Talking about the or even the Amazon.
Amazonian, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Not African. The
Okay,
Amazonian
gotcha.
women, they're known for being 12 feet tall.
That just reminds me of a Futurama episode.
But I'm
Death
just
by
thinking about
Snoo
Exactly.
Death by Snoo.
I was about to say, everybody tuning in right now knows what I'm referring to.
But just think about it though, at some point in time and age, people were that tall. But for survival, we've gotten smaller.
I think that also has a lot to do with environmental and things like that.
Well, yeah, but think about it. If having those people still that tall nowadays,
Yeah, for sure.
imagine trying to pass down those genes.
Oh my gosh.
There's that guy that's 7 foot tall. I think he's the tallest person. 7 foot tall or is 8 foot.
Yeah, see, I think the taller you get, the less life you get to live, because having a large body is hard for your heart and body to handle.
Unless you're built that size, though, like how they are, having an extra toe, extra ligament, your muscles would be that much bigger, though.
They just
I feel
crossed Santa Claus in his off season. You got mad.
I feel when you start having extra stuff like that, then yes, maybe the rest of your internal organs and stuff like that have also
they're gonna be a lot larger.
Different. Exactly. So maybe your heart would be able to support that.
Mm. I just need. I just would like a better explanation than he built different.
He built different.
He built different.
But imagine having a spear and having that much strength to go through a special forces outfit.
Uh-huh.
Like, not just a regular person's body, but they have stuff on them to withstand bullets. You know, like really high grade fucking armor on.
Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, they carry armor that is way better than, even like police. They're made to stop, very, very large caliber weapons.
And here's a spear. Rather, it's
Yeah,
just wooden or does have a steel tip. You know, it's still just a spear.
Yeah, but I mean,
but
it never said where the spear hit because the armor doesn't cover the whole body. It could have gone through the side, which isn't as armored as the front and back.
very
It
true.
could have gone through the sort of neck where like the top of the vest ends and then down.
Well, wherever it hit, it went straight through, is what, you know. Is what he did say. It went through the person. So, I can only imagine how horrific that looks.
Yeah, I mean, I like, and even before that, like, imagine how horrific a 16-foot giant hurling a spear at you would look. I mean, I'd be getting the fuck out.
That would also probably explain why they chose not to go down into the caves. Because if you're that tall, you're not going to have these smaller steps for things. You're going to be able to climb through something really fast. You know.
Yeah.
So that job was most likely 15 feet for them. And they're like, there's probably a lot more of these. So they're definitely gonna struggle. You know, a 6-foot person's gonna struggle with a 2-story building. Actually, how tall is a 2-story building? Is it 15 feet?
It's like
You can usually average each story out to a building like that somewhere between 8 to 10 feet per story.
So this person's basically taller than a 1-story building.
Right.
So yeah, jumping out of a 2-story window basically at that point. You know. Yeah, that's quite fucking tall to be going through. And
I mean,
probably that's why they have those cave systems, though. Think about it. Because, you know, they can't be out in daylight. I feel like they'd be attacked instantly.
And a 15-foot drop is rough.
With, you know, even with as armored as you are.
Yeah, I mean, and you got to carry at minimum. Their gear at minimum weighs a total of 50 pounds.
Yeah.
I mean, I've dropped from somewhere between 10 and 15 feet, and it hurts.
That's with no gear.
I planned my landing and everything, but it still hurt.
I know I've never jumped out of something that I jumped out of a tree before. I did a tuck roll thing, but I wound up slashing my arm open in the process. But like, still, even just then, you know, that still hurts. You know.
Right. I didn't tuck and roll, but I had to jump off the top shelf of a warehouse shelf, and those are pretty high.
Yeah.
My asshole manager forklifted me up there and then left me up there.
Oh, good.
I was like, "Thanks, bro."
But yeah, I know,
did
like, it
someone
hurts.
say OSHA violation?
I mean, you're not wrong.
I would have stayed up there like, yo, asshole, get me down.
I mean, I could have climbed, but I opted to jump instead. I could have climbed the side, but.
But would it have been safe? Like, would you have toppled the thing over? Like,
no, I wouldn't have toppled it at all.
Yeah, these warehouse shelves are pretty sturdy.
Yeah.
I want to see one of these giants, though. Like, they're ginger giants, basically. They have red hair. Good lord.
I wonder if they have
giants.
a soul.
With how much he threw that spear, I don't think so.
I mean, he's got a lot of spirit.
Oh God.
But done. But now just thinking about it though, like logically, and if their skin was the color like in that picture that was shown,
Like
they
a
have
greenish.
gray skin.
Well, it's like a greenish gray, if I recall that pic correctly.
Seems fitting of someone who doesn't get much sunlight, I guess.
Yeah, I would say so.
At first, I just thought they're about to
Over
just.
the edge and couldn't see how
Oh
far it
my
went.
god, that scared me. At first, I thought they were just gonna describe like House of Ashes, and like they're just describing a game. That's not a story.
Right.
It's like they're just about to talk about their bad House of Ashes run.
Trying to find it. Huh. Skipping through this thing is apparently a lot difficult than what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, it's not super easy to skip through it.
So just think about it though, like how that thing had to be huge.
Like imagine the feeling you would get to have something that big in
Just
front of
walk out and you not have a split second because you know if you do you're gonna die. So
you. Yeah.
they unloaded as much as they possibly could within a split instant into that thing.
I mean, just imagine, and even like the viewers tuning in right now, look at the ceiling in your room, and then add the additional feet to make it 16 feet. Because chances are, you know, most of us have 8 to 10 foot ceilings.
I think
So
most door frames are 7 feet tall.
exactly. So basically, you're doubling a door.
That is a very, very, very large person. The only thing I can think is the fact probably no more of them came out because they saw how fast it was put down. Because, you know, good and well, if there's all these different cave systems, I bet more than just one armed guard was standing there, you know, inside of where they had to be.
Right.
Yeah, and it just adds to the fact that there had to be more than one to take out that first squad, and not any of them get a word out.
Yeah, definitely.
Exactly. And then here's another thought. Think of how scary. We have a species in this country that is smart enough to structure to not give away that, oh, is there more? So now it's still left to wonder. And
Like, how many
they're
more
living
are
in
there?
this cave, like completely unnoticed essentially. I mean, it's marked on a map for the military, do not enter now, most likely.
Dwarves had a glow up nobody expected.
Like, they're living inside of this mountain, basically. And what's even that's more interesting is the fact that they left certain scraps, but they removed most of everything else. So think about it. These super tall people have guns. You know, they have
But
technology now that they would
if
have
they're
never had their hands on before.
if they're 15 feet tall, though, their hands are probably too big to use them.
Most likely. But they have that stuff. They cleaned up the area. Think about it. There's only scraps of little things that most likely they had difficulties trying to pick up. So, if you think of that logically, these things have stuff that they, would have never seen probably in their lifetime.
Right, and they're actually smart enough to have the ability to scrap and evolve. I wonder what their like their main establishment in this cave looks like, how they function on day-to-day life.
They must be sick of these soldiers coming up on the lawn with weird
Yeah.
killing machines.
Hey, you kids, cut that out.
But the
And
only
that's
thing
it.
is
Cheryl,
that...
get me the spear.
Right.
So the thing is, I'm wondering though, how thick is their actual skin? Because you think about, the Green Beret, that's the most likely 8 people, I believe, in there when their squad of like 8 to 10 people go out.
Yeah,
I
that's
would
about right.
believe so, something in that number.
Maybe as much as like 12 or 16.
Maybe I don't think it'd be more
Maybe,
than.
but I don't think the squad is that big because they usually keep it to a smaller squad because of communication purposes.
Yeah. So we're probably looking between a squad of 9 to 15. Let's just say that in like the max capacity of 15 people. And I think on a reconnaissance, like what they're doing, I don't think they'd send out the entire team first off. Because think of, they got out 2 helicopters. One was for the giant and one was for the team. These helicopters can hold up to, if I'm correct, 6 people? Maybe 8, counting the 2 gunners, if it was that kind of chopper.
If it was a traditional like Blackhawk chopper, yeah, it's about 6 to 8, I believe, unless I'm mistaken. If somebody listening in right now has better info on that, please add me on Twitter.
At any of us, use hashtag podcast, if you know the information better than us. We're kind of just speculating. So it means they had 8 people go there, basically. They're down 1 guy because he's just instantly dead, killed by a spear. So that's 7 people. Probably 8K, something like that, high grade weaponry, fully automatic kind guns. So something of that caliber.
And you got to remember, with a squad that size, you also have calibers ranging too, because there's different roles.
Yeah, so somebody's gonna have something a little bit heavier, a little bit lighter. Give or take.
You're gonna have your sniper. So you're going all the way up to what? Well, no, they wouldn't take a 50 cal into that type of a mission, but they're still gonna have a high-powered 7.62 rifle with armor penetrating rounds and shit like that.
Oh, they all have armor penetrating rounds. So.
And then you have like an LMG shooting armor pen rounds.
Probably, an infrared scope, something like that. So all the, what things what most people think about. So just thinking of all of that to take down, that giant. I'm wondering how many rounds, because by the story of saying it didn't take long to shoot him down. But if you're using, that kind of high caliber, if it was a normal gun, how much would that person be able to take?
That circles back around to the discussion of, the density of their skin, how thick it is, all of that.
Yeah, well, that's the point of the whole conversation, just to kind of think about it.
Not only that, they described it wearing pelts, and pelts are pretty thick. Like, it's not going to stop a bullet, but it's going to slow it down a lot.
Oh yeah, having pelts of whatever animals, or the sheep maybe that constantly go up in the mountains,
And those pelts were actually probably layered, I'm going to guess, by the size.
Yeah, with the size of how big this thing is, that's probably a good 30 pelts on that thing, if not more.
Exactly. Double, maybe triple thick.
Depending, definitely, if it's Afghanistan, snowy mountains, it's probably cold as fuck out there. So yeah, probably a good, doubled if not tripled layer. So 90 pelt, good lord, how heavy was that thing on that thing? Cool. Probably felt nothing to it. If it's like 1,200 pounds, to the point a chopper is having issues with it.
Well, didn't they say they extracted in a C-130?
I think so.
I mean, and a C-130 is our military's biggest cargo plane.
And it was having issues. Well, the helicopter to get it was having that issue. So whatever helicopter they had to get it to the cargo, the cargo plane.
Right.
But helicopters, those kind of military grade helicopters, how much they can lift, you know, and it's struggling to lift up this giant.
And most likely they pulled out a double blade chopper.
So thinking about that, you know, you're talking about a giant. You know, they're gonna pull out something, the biggest thing that think, oh, you know, this shouldn't have any issues. Even with giving the proportion size, they have to think of it logically. They wouldn't pull out some, you know, little thing that would definitely have any issues. So that definitely means it was most likely a team of 8 or less, because that one chopper would not be able to hold any extra weight with the giant itself.
And that chopper was probably already holding the weight of the like, you know, 2 at the side, Gatling guns on the side, plus a couple thousand rounds per. So that's a lot of weight right there already.
Yeah, and probably just
choppers like that are mainly, their main purpose is to move men, not cargo. So when they have a cargo that's really heavy, it's probably not really designed for it.
Yeah, so just trying to think of the capability of it. Probably 1,500 pounds, probably the max that thing can carry. And the fact that they were talking about having the netting having issues and just lifting it itself, like that's, you know, that's crazy to think about, like that weight size for a human being, you know. So like be able to see something like that, like, you know, there's so many, if we think about it nowadays, like these stories are just getting out to us, you know. Or people who are in the military or have past military experience, whoever, how deep they get into it, they have the ability to get these things in, and of course they can only tell it later down the line or however long. Like, think of how many more creatures they have been able to encounter something like this.
So from when I dated someone who was in the army, they share a lot of these kinds of stories. It's just like a thing they do.
Yeah, but that's only if like you're gifted enough to get those kind of stories, though. But think about it, though, how crazy it is for them to not be affected. They were probably affected by that for quite a bit, but with how much they're trained, they're not allowed to, you know, let it keep getting at them that much. To imagine being able to see something like that, and then the next day or the next few hours have to act like nothing happened.
Yeah, that's a hard part right there.
Like, I would have went ballistic if I see a 16-foot creature. And I'm saying creature because I ain't calling that thing human. I'm sorry. You may be humanoid, but you a creature to me if you're fucking 2 feet tall. Okay.
Exactly.
Like, you're the size of a fucking giraffe at that point. If you think logically of the animals we have, you're a giraffe.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate right there.
And so, a normal human doesn't even consider the leg length of a giraffe, you know.
Mm-hmm. The tallest human ever on record is 8 feet 11 inches.
So you're probably the size of its leg at that point. If not us
Perfect
being
height.
normal size, being above their kneecap, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Or not even touching their kneecap? Like, that's just crazy to fucking think about. Now, my only other question, though. What the fuck are they eating to survive this long?
Clearly, it's soldiers and goats.
Soldiers, there it is.
But, you know, that was one time. Or the natives that go up there and they get caught.
There's a lot of livestock in Afghanistan. Was that what it was?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of livestock there. A lot more than you would think in a place that's war-torn and such.
Oh, them goats, you know. I wonder if goats are gonna go extinct in that area. But think about it. For one of them, they could probably eat 2-3 goats. That's for one person, though. You know. think of an entire hive of these people. Like, how are they surviving to be still, super nourished and not being malnourished or something
They
like
could
that?
be like how some creatures would like store like fat on the body and then use that to energy so they don't have to eat as much.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I didn't think about that.
But
Especially
getting those
because
super high fattening diets, though, like from goats?
I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, if they're eating the whole thing, they're certainly getting it.
I mean, in the occasional cow, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And
Or
they're also going to
human.
need it if they're living up in mountain caves, which are cold, and then you go in the cave, they're going to get colder.
Yeah.
So it's not only just for the energy, it's also for the warmth, despite having the pelts.
But also, the possibility of that cave being colder would put your body into a bit of a hibernation phase, which means you also store that fat longer.
I just wonder
Kind of.
how many people, like, how many of those creatures could possibly be in there in those
I mean,
cave
maybe it was only
systems.
one, but I doubt it. With the way the
Not,
story went, I doubt it.
I'm about to say, not, yeah, with the story of the fact that Plateau reached 5 cave entrances, I think is what he said.
Right.
So that's 5 different entrances into a cave. And I bet you probably 1 or 2 of them are fake entrances, to, like, deter people. So there's probably maybe 2, 3 real entrances into that whole cave system. I'm just thinking of, like, earthquakes or things like that, but that stuff doesn't really happen there, if I'm correct. I'm just trying to think of, like, what the inside of this cave system could possibly look like. Like, I feel like, why wouldn't the government send in, like, drones? Or, like, the little spider cams?
It
Stuff
would
like
definitely have
that.
to be something very small.
Yeah, it is also. They did say it was in enemy territories, which if they're trying to do an investigation in enemy territories, that's a lot of expense. And one thing about the military is they try to cut that where they can.
Maybe the enemies are trying to keep people from finding them. Imagine if you ever thought about that during war. Why people try to stay in their own territory. Maybe they're keeping secrets like that.
I mean, it's very possible because they're probably way more knowledgeable about the whole thing than the U.S. military would be.
Yeah,
It's
because they probably have stories, growing up, the fairy tales,
exactly.
the story tells about these things, being out there and, being warned not to go, go out there type things.
It's definitely very interesting even the difference in folk tales between countries.
Still, I think that's kind of crazy just to really think about that kind of story and, those giants. All I can do is keep rethinking is reproduction of, like, the traits that would come down to them, like looking at their health compared to ours. It's like, I would really love to see that, like, on a medical standpoint. And, comparing the two people, like, their genomes, their health, just, like, everything.
Yeah, I would imagine their genetic makeup is a lot different.
And to think about it, if they are, say 1,200 pounds, 1,300, whatever they said it was above 1,000. Their body produced more ligaments, more toes, more fingers to support their weight. So their shoe size, if you think about it logically, could be like 32 feet, like 32 inches. Some people have 15, 16, 20.
You
There
just
could
said
be like
32 feet,
30s.
and I'm like,
I
I'm just
have
imagining
the
this
feet
15-foot tall dude with 32 foot
32
long feet.
messed up.
Man's got swimming flippers for feet.
Messed up inches. But still, think about it though, like how large their feet would be to, withstand that kind of height. Like that genetic coding. I just, those are the things I find interesting. imagine their children when they're born. Or, women out here complaining about a 7-pound baby.
Well, even at max, like a 12-pound baby.
They have what, a fucking 24-pound baby? I wouldn't. How the
No,
hell?
probably even a little bit more than that. But I know that's insane.
That's the size of a 7-year-old. 5. I don't know how heavy kids are. I really don't. So basically, birthing a 5-year-old at that point, maybe a 4-year-old.
Yeah, I was thinking like about a 4-year-old.
Imagine giving birth straight up to a 4-year-old.
And like how tall? How tall would this baby be?
I was like 7 pounds, 12 inches. So, just think of like that genetic code of like a normal child today compared to them. Like, good googly moogly. I don't know. That'd be kind of cool, just steal one. Put them on, Also, a lot of these things I think about, they go with rounds. Going back to the Skinwalker camp, why didn't they give this dude like tranquilizer darts? Or like tracker darts?
Well, the skin couldn't be pierced anyway, though. I mean, there is speculation that silver does it.
It got shot. It didn't say anything about the bullets not going into it,
But they also said there was no blood.
Okay, so it could be in the epidermis. So that
again,
means it could be like in the
thickness of
epidermis
skin.
then,
Yeah. It could just be lodged in his surface
It's still
skin.
in them, though. Like, give them, like, not tranquilizer. Dude, they'll probably have to have a elephant tranquilizer at that point, if not something bigger.
Shit. Whole squad of people with elephant tranquilizers.
Pretty much. But just think about that, though, at that point, Not even just get tracking darts.
I mean, that's, in my opinion, that would be the play there, would be the tracking darts.
This guy they found in a cave, they could ride elephants like horses.
Yeah,
Jesus.
Jesus, oh my god, they could. They would have a giraffe as a pet.
I mean, the elephant would be like, holy shit, get this fat ass off me. This dude built different. Get it off.
He built too different. No.
This dude weigh half as me.
Imagine that dude going up against an alligator, like the 17-foot one.
Just pick it up and throw it.
Hey, look, Mom, look what I caught. Just hold it.
I caught a funny
by
looking
the tail and
snake.
start beating it against the ground.
I found a chompy snake.
A chompy snake.
A chompy snake.
I like it. That's what I'm gonna call alligators
going
from
straight
now on.
to Twitter, that one.
Chompy snakes. Hashtag chompy snakes. Hashtag podcast.
You know if you know.
Florida, and you'll see all them 4-legged chompy snakes.
Yup.
Well, think about it. A regular snake would be a worm to them,
That'd be fish bait.
That would be fish bait. Pick up an anaconda. Oh, hey, look at this little worm. You'd be picking up alligators like they're like a snake. So chompy snakes. There, look, Mom, look what I caught. It tries to bite me.
But aren't some snakes already chompy?
But to a point. I would like to see an
not
anaconda.
as chompy as an alligator.
I would like to see an anaconda go against one of these giants.
A snake bite's more of a stab. They're not really biting. They're just kind of launching their teeth at you. By like launching their whole face at you.
They're hoping the glomp will attack. Like, I'm gonna just glomp you. Bite.
There's a whole vocabulary that I'm learning from her. Glomp you.
Right,
Yeah,
glomp. What is this?
That's from the 90s. Glomp is a tackle hug.
I'm gonna make a dictionary and just these are just words that I hear her say and what I think they mean.
Exactly.
Yep.
The
and then
rarity
just put
dictionary.
it together.
Gone is the days of the Webster dictionary. It's going to be replaced by the rarity dictionary.
Yeah.
Glump to eat or swallow.
Glump is to tackle. It's a hug
I'm,
cactus.
Tackle
Chompy
hug.
I'm a
snake.
shy
Another
on that
word
one.
for
Oh,
alligator.
what's happening? Oh my god.
What
Chompy
the?
snake.
Red and blue strobe lights.
Wait, what?
I
think,
don't know. Did you see it too?
I saw it
did.
too.
I did.
Okay, it's not just me.
Oh,
then.
I
It
haven't
was on
seen
my
anything.
face.
Yeah,
What?
I think there's like a hole in the wall, and I think some police lights have just like
Yeah.
shone through that hole or something.
Oh, I didn't see anything. But no, just think, Chompy Snake, like, hey, Ma, look what I caught. I just keep thinking of this, like, TikTok I saw. Like, when it comes to women, and when we go to show off our men, it's not because they're saying it's not because we love them or anything. Or it's like, we bring men home during the holidays to be like, hey, look, Ma, look what I caught.
Oh,
Can I
thanks.
keep him?
Can I keep him?
His name's Ben.
Yeah, I'm a chompy snake.
We're going to glump later.
Oh no.
Face attack.
I love how you guys are using all of my words.
Not to mention, they're probably gonna watch a lot of Tic Tacs. You know how many times I hear you say Tic Tac instead of TikTok?
What are you talking about? It's like TikTok.
You literally just like when you were just talking about that, you said Tic Tac.
I did not.
I can guarantee you, it sounded like Tic Tac to me.
No. Oh, this
You know,
is
wouldn't
now
put it
attack
past her.
rarity. Oh, good lord. This is our longest podcast ever. We are 3 hours and 6 minutes long.
Whew. It's my sparkling personality.
We have more stories we can watch if you want. I have 2 more listed.
I can't put much more time into this.
You want to do one more?
Oh my god, Rarity, you're killing me.
No, I'm not. One more.
I think I'm also ready to call it.
But
We gotta
I
go to
would,
Burger Shot. Gotta go bother them.
I would totally be down to be a guest on subjects like this.
You wanna
More
come
often.
tomorrow for the next one?
What I mean, what's the theme?
We can
Have you
do more
figured that out?
stories. This could be story week.
Story week. Yeah, I
Impro-
can let you know tomorrow.
The podcast is a very
Ever
lost my
changing
train of thought
topic.
in mind.
Exactly.
Well, I think that'll be it then, guys. I want to thank
Wow.
everybody who's been tuned in today. It's really crazy the fact we've been in live for 3 hours, but I've really enjoyed the conversations and the topics we covered today. I want to thank everybody who did stay tuned in this entire time. I really wish we had the ability to see who's tuned in, but I'm pretty sure there's a few of you who did, and we love all of you guys so much for actually staying with us this entire time.
For sure.
This is Rarity Snowheart, Benjamin Snowheart, Shy Blair, and
Yeah, I'm here too.
Towan. I never know Towan's last name, so I just call him Towan.
Towan Navar here.
Navarre. I just call you Towan.
Navar. I just said
Mhm.
here afterwards. Jesus. Sound like you're combining shit now. The words are all just glumping together at this point.
Chompy snake.
Chompy words.
Mm.
They're all just eating each other. They're eating the
Nobody see
spaces
my
in between
tweet
the
about
letters.
the chompy snakes?
Chompy
Yeah,
snake.
everybody keep an eye out for chompy snakes. They'll throw their face at you and glump the venom into your skin.
They just tackle you with their face. They just want to hug.
They just want to
Talk
kiss.
you with their face.
They just want to kiss.
They just tackle you with their face, and their body just comes along for the ride.
16-foot giants need glomping every once in a while.
I'm just thinking, if you ever did meet
Okay.
them, you'd start using words, and then like they'd go into like to talk to other people, and they'd be like, "What the fuck's up with these giants?"
Oh my god!
They're just coming
Yes,
at you
let
like
me
big glomp you.
Let me teach the giants. Yes. I want to teach the giants how to speak.
I'm very
That'd be-
disturbed.
That'd be amazing.
Jesus.
Hashtag ready for teaching giants. Please make that
Imagine the school comes to the city and you become a teacher. Like all the kids are just gonna be leaving. Like, hey, mom, I learned a new word. Instead of eating lunch, I glomp it.
Oh God.
You used the word wrong. No.
The hit pop song "I Glomped a Girl and I Liked It."
Oh my fucking God.
My favorite ones is one of the holidays where it's grandma got ran over by a chompy snake.
Here comes Glumpy Claus.
Oh my
Right
God.
down Afghanistan way.
Oh my god. Oh, I love you guys, and I hate you so much. You know, this is the podcast team signing out. Bye, guys.